If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Help You Find Me are the generous sponsors of the podcast for September, and they have some amazing software available today. A digital If I Go Missing file, Help You Find Me allows you to share personal information with those nearest and dearest to you in case of an emergency, or for general peace of mind. Netlandish, the company responsible for developing the Help You Find Me software, are a small but passionate team who created this software out of genuine concern for their own loved ones, and they use this software themselves on a daily basis. You can start a free trial today, or even get a 50% discount by visiting helpyoufind.me/HYFM cult, or click on the link in the episode description. That's helpyoufind.me/HYFM cult. Hello listeners, and welcome to this week's episode of The Cult Vault. This is the last episode of the month of September, and the last chance to tell you about our monthly memoir giveaway. Ronit Plank, who I interviewed for episode 118 about her memoir When She Comes Back, a coming-of-age story about her mother leaving her at a young age to follow Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, is being featured as this month's memoir with 3 copies signed by Ronit herself up for grabs. For the chance to win a copy, simply follow, like, and comment on any of my social media posts from September on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. The giveaway ends at the end of the month, and winners will be announced in October. I also wanted to give a special shout out to the anonymous donation that I received through Red Circle this week. I'm not sure who you are, but I appreciate what you have done by supporting the podcast through your donation. This week's episode is with Lonnie, a fantastic artist who is sharing his experience on Orthodox Judaism in America. To get in touch and share your story, please email me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com. But for now, here is Lonnie. So hi Lonnie, and thank you so much for coming to speak with me today. This is new territory for me on the show, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your story. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Sure. Well, my name is Lonnie, and the reason I'm on this podcast today, I suppose, is because I grew up in a community of modern Orthodox Judaism in New York, on Long Island, and it was a very insular community, and I would consider to be quite emotionally abusive, although most people within the community, as is the case, I would say, with most cults, do not see it that way and think it's super normal and so on. I did eventually get out, which I had been planning and trying to do for a long time, like during childhood, during high school, dreaming of the day and managing to get away to college in another state, although still being supported by my parents, who would keep an eye on me through the local rabbi and stuff. And so then eventually after college got a job that gave me financial independence so that I could actually be completely independent and was no longer under their thumb. And so that was in 2006. So I've been completely independent since then, and have actually, after a number of years of trying to have a civil, reasonable adult relationship with my parents, about 5 years ago, finally cut off contact after all that time. So Oh, and the other crux, I suppose, is that I'm also gay, and that was a big no-no where I grew up. So that was a big part of, I think, what led me to my initial questioning.
Wow, that's some introduction, that is. There's so much to go back on and talk about with
I'm a bit long-winded, so.
I absolutely love it, and I'm really looking forward to getting into more of the detailed parts of this story. But let's go back and start at the beginning, as far back as we can, I suppose, by asking if you could give us a little bit of insight into the practices of modern Orthodox Judaism.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is going to be a brief description, no matter how long I talk, because it's so extensive. And
okay.
So basically, according to the beliefs of modern Orthodox Judaism, and the modern is part of the title because there's also ultra Orthodox Judaism, and there's various flavors of strictness and so on. The image you would see in let's say a Netflix TV show like Unorthodox, that's ultra Orthodox. So that's maybe Hasidish or Haredi or something like that. And I had family, like extended family members who were part of those communities. So it's not like we didn't associate with one another,
right.
But I would wear jeans and t-shirts on the weekend, but I was always wearing a yarmulke on my head, right? The little Jewish cap. And I was always wearing tzitzis under my shirt, which is a four-cornered sort of small poncho-like garment that has a bunch of strings that are intricately tied in a particular way on each of the four corners. And so, but that was always under my shirt and tucked into my pants, whereas there are, other further right communities where they'll actually wear that on top of their shirt, so it's always visible. Anyway, that's just to say, modern Orthodox Judaism is, to a casual observer, especially if, let's say, you're looking at a woman or maybe a guy who's wearing a baseball cap or something, you might not actually even realize that they're Jewish if you can't see that they're wearing a yarmulke. But the rules are really extensive and strict. So there are 613 laws of Judaism, and that's a very special number. As an adult and as I've grown further away from the community and the indoctrination, I've come to see a lot of numbers and like numerology that are baked into a lot of the customs and rules that they put a lot of, I would at this point in my life say, magical importance into. Right. But definitely when I believed in it, and even for, I would say, quite a while after I stopped believing in it, the idea that they are considered magic numbers seemed preposterous to me. I was like, no, it's not. They're not crazy. They're just, indoctrinated. They just believe, in this particular religion. It's, not that different from any other religion. But anyway, 613 is a very important number. So there's a bunch of laws, and those are split up into sort of the do's and the do-nots. So a do would be like give to charity or pray 3 times a day. And a do not would be do not eat non-kosher foods. Do not kill, do not steal, those kinds of things. So I kind of feel like I'm getting a little off track already.
No, this is great for me as well. This is so different from what we usually do. We talk a lot about kind of on the show, a lot of Christian sects we've spoken about on the show, but I'm not too familiar with Judaism. Sure. So this is all, and I did read your work that we're going to talk about a little bit later, but so right. this is still really interesting. So please carry on and tell us more.
Yeah. So as I was saying, a bit of a brief overview about what the daily / weekly sort of rules and customs look like would be, so males have to wear a yarmulke on their head at all times, with some special exceptions, like if you're bathing, if you're going swimming, something like that. But basically there's a rule that like you're not allowed to walk something like 5 feet without a yarmulke, without some head covering. It can be a hat or whatever. The yarmulke itself is not like a particularly special amulet or anything like that. It's just kind of convenient, I guess, and become kind of a tradition, like a custom. So there's very extensive rules about what you are and are not allowed to eat, the laws of kosher. And to dig into that very briefly, fruits and vegetables are kosher. As for fowl, there are specific birds listed in the Bible, the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. So like chicken or pigeons or turkeys are, those are kosher birds. But if it's not listed, it's not considered kosher. Fish need to have fins and scales. So for example, salmon and tuna and trout, those are all kosher. But if it doesn't have one or the other, it's not kosher. So for example, a shark does not have scales, so it's not kosher, even though it has fins, right? Now, one of the little like, oh, look at the amazing divine wisdom of Judaism and God and all that is that Jews are basically like, if something has scales, it doesn't ever not have fins. So why are they both listed? This is the kind of question that is very encouraged when you're studying Jewish stuff in a Jewish environment. It's this, I would say, very superficial way of appearing like you're trying to poke holes in order to reinforce your faith, because there's always an answer, you know, but it's always a kind of question that is either not actually that critical. It's not particularly critical or interesting in my opinion. You know, it's these very like, yeah, well, it's like that example, right? So if God knew that there were no fish that had scales but no fins, or rather, if God knew that there were no fish that had scales but no fins, why would he list both in the Bible? Why wouldn't he just say it needs to have scales? And the answer is, I forget, but there's some answer that the rabbis tell that's right. Like, oh, you see, it's because blah, 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 whatever. And that's the kind of thing. But there are a bunch of questions that you can ask that don't have an answer, which you're just supposed to accept as, you know, they say it's a kasha without a teretz. That's Yiddish for it's a question without an answer. And
if your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
That's supposed to reinforce your faith as well as being in the position to recognize that there's no way a lowly human could ever actually understand the logic or plan of God. Right. So I see the whole custom of sort of, you know, questioning and figuring out answers. It's looking for something to explain away. Right. You're starting from the position of, how can this fit my narrative? How can this fit the system? And finding something to make it make sense, rather than genuinely asking a question. And when you find there's no answer, rather than saying, well, as a human being, I must not be able to understand God, instead being able to say, oh, well, if it doesn't seem like it makes sense, maybe it just doesn't make sense. Because it doesn't, because it's not actually divine or whatever. But I've gotten off track again. So coming back to the laws of kosher, that's fish. When it comes to meat, it has to both chew its cud and have split hooves. And there are specific animals listed in the Bible that have one or the other. So for example, pigs have split hooves, but they don't chew their cud, so they're not kosher. And I think biblically or historically, like traditionally, what have you, rabbits, the way they digest things, are considered to kind of chew their cud in a way, but of course they do not have any kind of hooves, so they're not kosher. And horses chew their cud, question mark, I think maybe, but they don't have split hooves. Maybe they have neither, I forget. Anyway, those are the two rules for meat. So for example, cows and deer are kosher.
Oh my goodness, this is like so specific.
Yes, everything is hyper focused on all of these intricate details. It is very, I would say it I'm no psychologist or psychiatrist or anything, but to me it does appear to encourage and potentially exacerbate obsessive compulsive tendencies. There are I forget what the term is, but there are certain obsessive compulsive tendencies that can manifest specifically during childhood, that can also like go away. It's mentioned in the comic Fun Home by Alison Bechdel, actually, at one point. She talks about this OCD behavior where in her journal she would write this symbol over things to kind of like in a sense, ward off like a jinx kind of
Right.
thing.
Yeah.
And I definitely experienced a very, very similar thing when I was growing up too. There's a phrase, there are a couple phrases like bli neder and bli ayin hara, which are things that people might say to sort of quote unquote ward off the evil eye, which is essentially like, here's an example. You know someone who uses crutches, and you think it would be a fun goof to go play around with the crutches and be like, what's it like to walk around with crutches, even though I don't have to? It's like tempting God to make you need crutches. So like, don't play around with crutches if you don't need them, because then you might go and break your leg, and then you'll really need crutches.
Right.
So God is very much this weirdly petty, vindictive character who would, it's really very much a narcissistic parent kind of situation. And so where you have to like always be nervous or trying to predict how not to set him off, which is something that I experienced with my parents as well. And so these phrases like bli neder, bli ayin hara, people might say after they say something like, oh, not to jinx it, or not to tempt God to like do this to me, but like, well, did you see such and such? It's like, something you might say when you're gossiping or something.
Yes. Yeah. Like, and when you say like,
knock on wood,
I could kill him, but if he turns up dead, then it didn't have anything to do with me. Like, I'm just like letting you know that.
Right. But you didn't hear it here, Yeah, it's like knock on wood or something like that. And so as a young kid, I definitely had a period of time, maybe it was years, where I would say that under my breath to myself, like after almost any statement, just to like make sure nothing I was saying, in case any of it wasn't actually accurate or true, that I wasn't like potentially dooming myself to some punishment or whatever. So I've gotten off track again. Back to kosher laws. In addition to the chew and cud and split hooves, there's a specific way that animals need to be killed depending on the type of animal. So if it's like red meat, they're like hung upside down and their throat is cut and the blood is drained, and blood isn't kosher, so you have to like very thoroughly salt the meat and all this. And it's done by, I forget if it has to be done by a rabbi or just like someone who's Orthodox Jewish or something, but I think there's a blessing you say, and it's a whole process. So like so Jewish or kosher meat is a lot more expensive because it's made by much, much smaller, Jewish companies that are specifically catering towards Orthodox Jewish communities, right? And so yeah, it's a whole process. Bugs are not kosher, although biblically there's like one particular kind of like locust or grasshopper that is kosher, but the tradition has been lost over the centuries and millennia of which one it is. So we just consider all bugs not kosher. Like this is just one of the little things that you're kind of taught in yeshiva. Yeshiva being Orthodox Jewish school.
It's so strange. It's like, how does anybody ever eat anything?
It's well, so these days, in modern days, there are companies in countries with relatively larger Jewish populations, which is still, a tiny percentage, no matter where you look, except Israel, obviously. But if there's enough Jews living somewhere, there's enough of a population to support companies that will basically be hired to inspect the ingredients lists and the factories, and give certification that something is kosher to a certain degree. So for example, these are called hechshers. If you look on a package of Oreos, let's say, at least in America, you might see a circle, like it almost looks like some kind of trademark symbol, but inside the circle is a U. And that stands for the Orthodox Union, which is an Orthodox Jewish organization that will certify products as kosher. And so Orthodox Jews, if they're looking at the package, somebody else might be looking, is it gluten-free? Does it contain dairy?
Yeah. I can't have anything with milk in, so I'm always looking for the vegan.
So you're always looking for little symbols, right? So this is another one of those that specifically certifies.
Wow, I had no idea.
For Orthodox Jews. Now there are even stricter standards, like, it's slipping my mind now, but growing up, there were definitely Jews who would only eat dairy, like cream cheese or milk or whatever, that was like basically, I think, milked by someone Orthodox Jewish. Like someone Jewish was doing
Wow.
it for the whole process. And I forget what that term is called, but like my family wasn't that strict. My family, as long as it was like technically kosher, it was fine. But there were also symbols like just a K or a circle K or whatever growing up that was like, oh, we don't consider that to be strict enough. Like a conservative being a sect of Judaism, a conservative Jew might consider that to be kosher, but we don't. It's not strict enough for us. We don't trust that brand, that organization.
So you're kind of like middle of the road.
That's how they like to perceive themselves. Modern Orthodox Jewish folks tend to really, in my experience, lean on the modern part of it to be like, we're not crazy, we don't have like the payas, the really long side locks that are all curly and whatever, right? But we still adhere to the rule that you can't cut your
sideburns.
Sideburns, thank you. You can't cut your sideburns shorter than there's like a bone here, there's like a jawbone like halfway up your ear. That's the line you can't cut it any shorter than.
What happens if you like have an accident with the clippers?
There are a lot of I wouldn't say exceptions, but like a forgiveness for accidents.
Wow,
so accidents, like if you're not intending to do anything wrong, or if a life is in danger, you can break almost any religious rule,
right,
in Orthodox Judaism, to save a life or whatever. If you eat something non-kosher by mistake, like you were really genuinely not intending to do it and somebody tricked you, or you just whatever, there's a mistake, it's not considered something you'd be punished for because you didn't mean to do it.
Is the kosher diet just because of scripture from the Torah then, or is it, or how is that?
So it's mostly based on scripture, okay. But over the millennia, as with all rules in Orthodox Judaism, over the millennia, rabbis have put what they call fences around the rules. So right. They'll make their own rule around a core rule, so that you're going to try not to break the rabbi's rule.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Because even if you do that, you still might not get far enough to break the core Torah rule. Right. So there are terms when you're discussing, like when you're studying Talmud, which remind me to talk about that in a second. They'll talk about fences around fences. And so over the millennia, there are so many layers built up that are supposed to keep you from breaking the core biblical rules. So for example, in biblical times, chicken meat was not considered to be meat. It wasn't considered to be something you weren't allowed to eat with dairy. So here's another kosher rule: no meat and milk. You may or may not have heard of this before. So you can't have a cheeseburger, right? You can't have the cheese with the meat.
Oh wow, okay.
Or if you're eating, I don't know, a burger, you can't have a glass of milk or whatever. You can't mix milk and meat. Now, at some point in time, historically, chicken, which used to be seen as kind of a neutral thing, even today, fish is not considered meat by Jews. It's called parv. So there's milchix, which is Yiddish, which is basically almost the same as German because it's mostly Middle German, which means milk, like milk products, and fleischix, which is flesh, right, which is meat products. And then there's parv, and that's neutral. So bread is parv. It's not milk, it's not meat, right?
Right.
So fish is also considered parv. You can have a tuna melt because the meat of the fish is not considered meat. Wow. So you can have it with milk, with dairy products, right? Now, back in the day, chicken was in the same category as fish. And so you could have your chicken with a glass of milk. But over time, the status of chicken as a food product ended up being raised to the point where it was considered a type of meat for the purposes of like, we're having a feast or we're going to honor someone or, whatever.
Yeah.
It's a proper meal. Let's have some meat. Let's get some chicken. And so in order to make sure people weren't confused into thinking you can have meat and milk together, the rabbis basically said, okay, chicken is now considered to be like a type of meat. You can't have chicken with milk, even though biblically you can, because we don't want someone, where in the time where, like, if most people weren't actually illiterate, they were at least not like studying Jewish texts all day, like the rabbis are. And so if they just see a neighbor, like a fellow Jew having chicken with milk, then they might say, oh, milk and meat is okay according to our religion, so I'll go and have milk with my steak. And so in order to avoid that potentially happening, they said chicken and milk is also now no longer okay. And that happened hundreds of years ago. So, right, milk and meat, can't have them together. Another fence that's around that is these days, after you eat meat, you have to wait a period of hours until you're allowed to eat milk again. And on average, around where I was growing up, that period of time could be between 6 and 8 hours. So if you have a burger, you cannot have ice cream for dessert. You would have to wait 6 or 8 hours until you can. Now, those traditions vary. I knew people whose families only waited 3 hours. There were certain traditions that you only had to wait 1 hour. But the idea is you might still have pieces of meat stuck in your teeth for some period of time.
Oh, your teeth. I thought it was going to be because you're still digesting the meat, which
no,
takes generally longer than other things to digest in your body.
That would be a reasonable assumption. But these rules are from a time before science and before digestion was understood in any capacity.
Flossing.
It was all exactly. It was all extremely surface level, right? Wow. It's all very superficial. So, for example, like that reminds me that, okay, so gelatin is typically not kosher because it's usually made from non-kosher animals. And there are medicines, like cold medicine or whatever, that come in gel capsules that are wrapped in basically like a hard gelatin that is not kosher. But as I said, for health, sickness, exceptions can be made. And so the advice I was taught in school, if you have to have like a gel capsule medicine, is to wrap the gel capsule in like a piece of paper or something and swallow it so that you don't taste it, so that it doesn't touch your mouth. Because obviously all of these controls are about controlling what forms of pleasure people can have, right? And so as long as
they can't, surely no one's going to come out and openly say that. So how do they, even if it doesn't touch the inside of your mouth, it's absolutely going to touch the inside of your body. Right.
Well, I mean, no, but they did say that. They were like, as long as you're not tasting it, it's okay, because you're not like deriving any pleasure from this thing you're not allowed to have.
Oh my goodness. So basically, because everybody has to eat and drink, we have to eat and drink to live. So a lot of our motivations, our primal motivations as animals, comes down to what we consume with our food and our drink. So if you're being so micromanaged through your diet, and all you're thinking about is how many hours, I must keep an eye on the time so I know when I can next eat something, so I don't accidentally go and have a piece of chocolate that has dairy in.
Yeah. Yep.
How do you have space for anything else other than your spiritual alliance?
Let me tell you, all of these rules around what you can and can't eat and how are just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much other stuff.
Well, 613 things that's a hefty number of things to be constantly trying to juggle and remember.
It's very true. Before you eat anything, you have to say a short blessing, like a very short 1-sentence Hebrew blessing. And usually this is just kind of whispered under your breath because it's essentially a formality, a required formality. But there are several blessings depending on the category of food you're having. So there's a different blessing depending on whether it's a fruit, a vegetable, bread, a baked good that's not bread, like pasta, let's say. Specifically a liquid made from grapes, so grape juice or wine. And then there's like a neutral one that's for other liquids, drinks, meat, fish, dairy. So there are all these little prayers.
Wow.
And before you start eating something, you only have to say it once. It's not like in between bites or anything. It's not crazy. But, and then afterwards, most things that you eat afterwards, there's a short sort of after meal prayer, grace after meals, I think they call it, right? Well, in English, they would use the Hebrew term, typically. But if you had bread, then anytime you have bread, you have to wash your hands in this way, where you take this big cup, and every Orthodox Jewish household has a washing cup, is what they will typically call it, where you fill up the cup and you do it. You splash water, you pour water twice on each hand, and I forget whether it's like once on one and once on the other, once on one the other, or twice on one and twice the other. It's been so long that I kind of forget that. And you say a special prayer while you're drying your hands, and then you say another special prayer right before you eat the bread, and then you eat the bread. And if you've eaten bread, you don't actually have to say a food prayer for anything else you eat during the meal, because that just kind of like starts the meal. That encompasses everything. But then afterwards, there's a really, really, really long grace after meals that takes like a few minutes to say. Once you're done eating a meal that involved bread. So like, it would not be unusual in my experience for people to avoid eating bread at a meal because they didn't want to have to wash. And they didn't want to have the, like, say the really, really long prayer after the meal, because it's just annoying. It's inconvenient. And the thing is, when there's this huge mountain of rules and regulations over every single tiny part of your daily life, they just become little flies buzzing around. They're just everywhere. You're walking through a cloud of all these little gnats that are just, just like everywhere. And you get used to it, but you can still kind of be annoyed by it, but you navigate it because it becomes second nature. You learn it from the time you're born. And
yeah, this was going to be a question I was going to ask. So all of these tiny little details that you've mentioned here, which I'm sure is just like, you're just reeling stuff off the top of your head, like we're not even getting into like the detailed parts that I'm sure would just be absolutely like overwhelming for somebody like me, that this is all new for. But at what age are you reasonably supposed to be able to independently remember all these things? When is it expected for you to know the verses before and after food and all these different rules? So this definitely varies from family to family, and as many rules as there are that are consistently taught to everyone in the community, Orthodox Judaism puts a very large focus, or not focus, but puts a lot of importance on family tradition. So if your father and his father, etc., did something a certain way, there's a lot of gravity in that. Even if your neighbor's family does something a way, different from your way, both of your ways can simultaneously be correct for each of you, even if you're not allowed to do it their way and they're not allowed to do it your way. As a larger example of this, so on the holiday of Passover, you're not allowed to have leavened bread. What that means more practically is the only product with any grains in it you can have is matzah, which is made in this very specific way. It's this flatbread where after the flour is mixed with water, it's only allowed to rise for some very special number of minutes. It's like 18 minutes or something, which is the numerological value of the Hebrew word for life, chai. Anyway, I think that's what it is, or I think that's what the number of minutes is, but because it's usually 18. 18 comes up a lot. But anyway, that's the only grains product you can have over the 8-day period of Passover. Pesach is what we called it. No pasta, no pizza, no bread, no anything like that, right? However, certain
traditions, so typically Sephardi Jews, which are more Middle Eastern descent. I'm considered an Ashkenazi Jew, more Eastern European descent. I'm talking about the Sephardi Jews. They will often have a rule that says on Passover they can have rice if before Passover they go through and they inspect each grain of rice to make sure that there's no wheat or anything else mixed in with them, so that they don't by mistake like cook anything else with it, right?
Okay.
But if they go through that work before the holiday, they can have rice. Ashkenazi Jews are not allowed to have rice, even if they do that, because it's not part of their family tradition. And so, I went to school with both Ashkenazi and Sephardi Jews. And so I had classmates who would have rice on Passover. And like if an Ashkenazi person came over to their house for one of the meals, they would not be allowed to have the rice because it's not kosher for them. But both families, both traditions recognize that under this system that puts a lot of importance on the tradition, the like familial direct descent, tradition of things, that it's almost a quantum physics situation where it is simultaneously kosher and not kosher, right? It's kosher for this person and it's not kosher for that person.
That's so interesting, because it like you said earlier, like you would be in communication with people from these different branches of Judaism, and it usually in these situations you would hear the like us versus them in kind of inverted commas.
Oh, there's plenty of that, just not in this particular context.
That's so strange though, isn't it? Like,
yes.
Because there's usually that holier than thou mentality where people will look over and go, oh, I can't believe that they would let their family eat that when it's definitely not kosher.
I mean, my family, my community, I would say, just to generalize, obviously this doesn't apply to everyone, but the general impression I got was that they didn't really consider anyone any less strict than Orthodox, modern Orthodox. So as soon as you get to, for example, conservative Judaism, or even worse, Reform Judaism, I would say, in sarcastic, mock terror, they would hardly even be considered Jewish. Like they're so incredibly lax. They don't keep rules of the Sabbath, of Shabbos, or kosher like they're supposed to. They don't have two sets of dishes, one for dairy and one for meat, which of course we had and everyone in my community had. Things like that.
That's interesting in itself though, because that doesn't, I mean, I
like looking in the opposite direction, looking to the ultra Orthodox, I would say the mentality that I grew up around was like, I think there was a bit of reverence, like, oh wow, if only we were so disciplined that we were able to live that way, but dang it, I just can't give up my movies. My whatever. And I think there was reverence there. They didn't think they were crazy or anything. They were like, oh, that's really impressive. I bet they're going to have a better time in the afterlife than I will, but look, I'm doing my best. All right, very Jewish kind of thing.
That is so interesting. And I wonder as well, I always think about this, and this is something I think has come up in other episodes where I've spoken about modesty, where people are told to be as modest on the outside as they are on the inside. And I think to myself, what if you are somebody who is maybe not as fortunate in life to be able to dress in the way that the again, in inverted commas, the most modest of people have been encouraged to dress, and does that mean that person then is less spiritual than the person that is in a position to be able to dress that modestly and wear those types of clothes and live in those types of conditions? And again, if you don't have two sets of dishes, does that mean that you're not as spiritually devoted to your God as the more conservative Jews? Does that make some sense?
I think that's on the right page, that's on the right path. So for example, the tzitzis that I mentioned much earlier, the four-cornered garment that modern Orthodox Jews, males, wear under their shirt. There's no command saying that you have to wear this every day. The commandment is, if you are wearing a four-cornered garment, if you're wearing a poncho, something like that, as a Jew, you have to create these fringes, these tassels or whatever, that you tie to all four corners. Like, super random rule. If you wear this particular kind of clothing, you have to accessorize it in this particular kind of way. Sort of fabulous. And the reason it's become a tradition of every male wearing tzitzis every day is out of this this perspective, or this point of view of, if you have the opportunity to do a mitzvah is a positive commandment, something you're supposed to do, like give to charity is a mitzvah, pray 3 times a day is a mitzvah, right?
Right.
Say the blessings before food is a mitzvah. If you have an opportunity to do a mitzvah and you specifically don't do it, it's almost like you've done an avera. An avera is a sin. Mitzvahs and averas are kind of the two, the do's and the do-nots.
Right.
So if it's easy enough, like if it's available for you to put on a pair of tzitzis every day, it's like you're getting these mitzvah points, not literally, but like you're getting kind of some kind of spiritual credit from God on his on his report card.
Yeah, and going back to what you said before as well about how you almost don't want to jinx yourself, like when people will avoid walking over 3 drains, or we have these birds over here in England called magpies, and if you see one magpie, you're supposed to salute it because otherwise it's bad luck. It's almost like going back to what you said before, where you would say that line under your breath because you just to be sure,
just to be safe. Yeah,
it sounds 100%. A little bit like just more of that, really.
Yeah. I mean, they absolutely share a lot of overlap, certainly.
And something else that I thought was interesting when you were talking is when I did some research into Scientology, not Scientology, Heaven's Gate, sorry. And when the community within the big mansion that they were living in, when they would sit down to have dinner, there was a very specific way that everything had to be done. So they would cook, like everybody would have to follow this recipe to make pancakes, like down to the letter. And then you would cook the pancake for a certain amount of seconds on one side and then flip it a certain way and then cook it for a certain amount of seconds on the other side and then serve it in a certain way and have your cutlery all laid out in a certain way. It sounds
extremely familiar to me.
And that's kind of what I'm that's kind of what it made me think of when you were talking about all these different specific ways things are supposed to be done.
I think it's very similar, and let me tell you, in my personal life, I still very much behave that way. I don't cook anything improvisationally. I follow recipes very strictly. It just makes me very uncomfortable to do otherwise. And it's I mean, it's almost like a running joke with my partner, because they don't really enjoy following recipes particularly, and they'll look it over and get the general idea and then kind of do what feels
like
right.
When you're doing flat packing and then it all goes wrong and you're like, I should have just followed the instructions.
well I enjoy baking, because with baking you really do need to follow the recipe. Like,
that's true.
You got to have this many grams and it's got to be at this temperature and whatever. And if you follow all the instructions right and your equipment is working correctly, right, your oven actually gets the right temperature and whatever, it's going to come out just the way it's supposed to come out. And I love that. It's, you get rewarded for following all these rules really strictly. And so that just feeds into my brain at this point, right? But improvising a recipe on the fly, oh gosh, I could never. My anxiety, I would never be able to do something. So you do the cooking, I'll do the baking, we're good.
It's interesting as well about the groups that will only consume food and drink that's been prepared by certain people and throughout the entire process, because with manufacturing these days and how a lot of businesses are only reliant on machinery to prepare and package a lot of food, that's not even a person at all, like no matter what their affiliation is with
Right.
a certain religion or branch of religion. It's a programmed piece of equipment.
That is true. When it comes to Orthodox Judaism, though, it's not like there's any issue with using machinery or equipment or anything. It's more like there are just certain parts of the process that, when done by a human person, like needs to be done by someone who observes certain laws, like laws of kosher, laws of Sabbath, or they need to be there to be able to say a certain blessing before the process starts. Parts of those ritual,
This is so different to like what I've heard before. The amount of rules and regulations that go into an everyday.
Yeah, and so there are all these things that are very specific and like biblical in nature, right? Think things like what you're allowed to eat and whatever. And then there's just a million little superstitions that have piled up over the centuries as traditions, rituals. For example, the way you're supposed to tie your shoes. You're supposed to put on your right shoe and then you're supposed to put on your left shoe. And you're supposed to tie your left shoe and then you're supposed to tie your right shoe. And the way you cut your nails, you're not supposed to cut your nails in order, like from thumb to pinky, because that's what they do when they prepare a dead body. And so you're supposed to cut your nails out of order. And there's just a million of these little things,
How is anybody supposed to remember any of this stuff? So it's so overwhelming.
So nobody, almost nobody, or I would say it's unusual for anyone to really know all the rules, right? And there are a lot of rules that, as I said, can vary from community to community, family to family. I mentioned the Talmud much earlier, and I'm going to refer to that as Gemara because that's the word that we used, which is different from Gomorrah, the city, the biblical city. Gemara, different text. Anyway, like Sodom and Gomorrah. Anyway, I'm getting off track. So Gemara, Talmud, according to what I was taught, is one half of the tradition of the Torah. So Orthodox Jews believe that there's the written Torah, and that's the 5 books of Moses, and there's the oral Torah, and that is the interpretation of the 5 books of Moses. And the oral Torah, over the centuries and millennia, would be sort of forgotten. Details would be forgotten by people, by rabbis. And so over time, they would start writing kind of shorthand notes or scraps of memories of conversations that someone witnessed happen between multiple rabbis as they were discussing one topic or another. And that became something called a text called the Mishnah. And then eventually the stuff in the Mishnah was kind of too vague for people to quite remember the whole story. It's like if you write down a quick note to yourself and you're like eggs, and you look at that later and you're like, eggs, what does that mean? Are we out of eggs? We're not out of eggs. Do we need more eggs? Why did we need? So the Mishnah ended up becoming not enough. And so people who did remember stuff related to those Mishnahs wrote additional notes called Gemara. And these days, if you go and you buy a volume of Talmud, of which there are many, 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 many volumes, it will have the Mishnah, a bit of Mishnah, and then a much longer part of Gemara, which is the sort of unpacking and interpretation and commentary on that. And even furthermore, around those two things in the margins of the page, and it's printed this way, are commentaries by all sorts of different rabbis or groups of rabbis over the century, like someone named Rashi, a group named Tosfos, and so on. And so this is all like the ways to interpret the very simple laws in the written Torah.
Right.
For example, the written Torah says, do not kill. But at the same time, you are allowed to go to war to defend the country, at least biblically, the country, the kingdom of Israel. So you're allowed to kill in that context. So what does do not kill really mean? And so then they'll have pages and pages and pages of recorded conversations between rabbis thousands of years ago who are asking hypothetical questions. It's very much lawyering, sorts of stuff, where they're like, okay, well, what about this scenario? What about this case? If so-and-so did such and such, who's responsible for what? It's a lot of legalese, ancient, Aramaic legalese in there. It's written in Aramaic. And we study this in growing up in yeshiva. And so you learn stuff like, okay, if you're defending yourself, it's okay to kill. And like maybe the laws might be slightly different between if you're dealing with a fellow Jew, if compared to whether if you're dealing with someone who's not Jewish. A lot of laws are much more lax religiously or like biblically when dealing with someone who's not Jewish. It tends to be stricter when you're dealing with a fellow Jew, especially with things like charging interest and whatever. And so, there are rules and interpretations around getting abortions, from thousands of years ago that are basically like, if there's a danger to the mother's life, get that abortion, get that thing out of there. We don't consider that to be a person anymore. And, there's rules about like when and how and why to do all these things. Is it considered killing? So that's just one example. Like, do not kill. What does that mean? It could mean a million different things. And so the Talmud, the Gemara, is like that it goes on and on and on and on and on. What if an ox falls into a hole, and breaks its leg? Who's responsible? Well, whose property was it on? And da 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 da. So anyway, there have been historically sects of Judaism that essentially do not recognize or do not believe in the oral Torah. They basically say, we've got this book, the Torah, and that's all folks. Like, we believe in that, and and we don't recognize the validity of this oral Torah thing you're talking about.
Right.
Pharisees, which is essentially rabbinical Judaism. And when I was growing up, these other historical, typically no longer existent sects of Judaism would be demonized and made fun of, like, yeah, well, where are they today? They all died because they took it too literally, that blah, blah, blah. So, there's definitely a lot of looking down upon other sects of Judaism that do not follow things in all the same ways, or,
It kind of almost sounds like what happened with things like Seventh-day Adventism and Pentecostalism and things like that with Christianity, where there's like almost like a revival where 10 people have entered a room and they've all said, well, we all disagree with each other, so I'm going to go off and start this group, and this is how I'm going to interpret things. And that's how my ancestors will go on to interpret things, who then also have people within those groups and people within those groups who say, well, actually, I interpret it different. So then you've got all these different layers of Judaism, and they kind of all have a baseline, but all interpret things differently and carry out all of these wild amount of rules differently.
It's not at all unusual for there to be Reform Jews who identify as atheist, right? They do not literally believe that God exists,
right?
But they identify with the traditions, the culture. They enjoy going to services, even if that's maybe only a few times a year. They like to sing the songs in Hebrew and, do the special Seder meal on Passover, but they don't study all this incredibly detailed rules lawyering. Right?
That sounds like a perfect compromise, because you've still got the community aspect there of being part of something maybe bigger than yourself, but without the obligation of all of the restrictions that come with being completely involved, I suppose.
Yeah. I can certainly see the value and enjoyment for someone. For me personally, because I was in such a cocoon that I cannot bring myself to find any enjoyment or value in any of it. I have no interest in practicing any part of the tradition or any of that. I have friends who are like, hey, we're doing a radical feminist, queer, progressive Seder meal for Passover, and basically it's just going to be poking fun at how incredibly racist and bigoted the whole thing is and reclaiming it. And I'm like, okay, you have fun. I'm going to be over here trying not to think about any of that ever again, actually. That's what I prefer to do. Like, I have no interest in reclaiming things or reinterpreting things. I'm atheist. I don't believe in God. And I think that the whole system is emotionally abusive. It's filled with, emotional scare tactics about going to hell, and, the kinds of biblical punishments that there would be in the, whether or not it ever really existed, like religious kingdom, biblical religious kingdom of Israel, where the court of law was religious, essentially an ancient theocracy, and the kinds of punishments that were given for various types of various types of sins were so incredibly horrifying. Things like pouring hot lead down people's throats is just one of them. That's just one of the ways you could be killed. Like, there are a list of different ways you could be killed for sinning. And of course, but it's so reasonable because there needs to be at least 2 witnesses, and it needs to go to court, and nobody's ever actually been killed this way is one of the things that I would hear many times growing up. This is just like really to communicate how serious it is not to do this sin. And stoning to death. And it's like, one of the things you could get stoned to death for is like having gay sex, and I'm gay, and I don't want to get stoned to death. I don't think that's reasonable. And you know what? Honestly, I don't think any part of the religion can be reasonable if it believes in that, and if it believes in legally sanctioned forms of slavery, literal slavery. I do not recognize as valid the apologetics of saying, well, it was a much more reasonable kind of slavery back in the day, it was only for this many years, and then whatever. No, I don't. I'm not convinced or interested in any of that. I do not see any baby in this bathwater. For me, it's all toxic. So
it's from my perspective, it's really hard for me to. I don't offer my opinion very often on how I think and feel about groups, because they're not experiences that I've had personally.
Sure.
But from my point of view, I don't understand how a movement or a group or a religious sect or whatever word you want to use to apply to whatever community you're talking about. I don't see how a group can present itself as all loving and a positive community if they don't endorse people to love who they want to love in that community. And all of these groups that we discuss on this podcast don't seem to have space for the LGBTQIA plus community, or for people who are a lot of the time suffering with their ill mental health, where they are encouraged to go and pray more or meditate more. Don't go and seek professional help. You just need to strengthen your relationship with God, and instead of potentially taking life-saving medication for an oncoming potential diagnosis of schizophrenia or something like that. But so I don't see from my point of view how a group can promote itself as all loving if that's not what it's doing to the members of the group, if that makes sense. I always say as well on this show that I'm not very good at articulating my thoughts when I have them, but it just doesn't seem to be like there is space for everybody in these groups.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And I do want to acknowledge that there are much more progressive and left-leaning branches and sects of Judaism these days that are very queer positive and embracing of, queer folks and so on. Once again, I don't believe in the religion, and obviously I've made that clear, but I have no interest in being a part of a community that is specifically based around the tradition or religion of Judaism, even if they're like, oh, but the gays are okay now, so it's all good, right? I'm like, just look in your quote unquote holy text. Like, I don't know why you need to pick and choose and say, yeah, but look at this one verse that's like really great and positive and lovely. It's like, yeah, but read the next one. Isn't that grotesque? Like, we have our own innate ethics and morality, I believe, and you can practice being a good person and generous and magnanimous and merciful and understanding and sympathetic and empathetic. You can do all these things without a special holy book, even if you don't even believe in God, right? And you just consider it to be a valuable tradition that your ancestors have practiced. I don't feel that way personally. I think the valuing the things that your ancestors did, for me personally, feels like the oh gosh, I forget exactly what it's called, but it's the logical fallacy that is some appeal to tradition, I think maybe it's called, where essentially you're like, well, this is how it's always been done, therefore it's good or correct or valuable. And I don't think that's necessarily true. And so I don't know. I don't relate to the feeling of connecting to my ancestors, quote unquote, or whatever. Because listen, if I were around at any point in history, living with my ancestors as a gay man, I'd have been at least ostracized, if not killed, unless I had pretended to be straight and married a woman and so on. When I came out, my mom was essentially like, I don't care. That's no excuse. You still need to marry a woman and have kids. Like, why do you think being gay makes you special? You have these responsibilities, and this is not unique to Orthodox Judaism. This happens all around the world in religious and non-religious countries,
that must be so tough to be in that environment and to actually have that conversation with your parents, and that's the response that you're given. That must be
right. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Oh yeah. So yeah, I feel like I've gotten a little off track, but
well,
what were we talking about?
were you were born into this?
Yes.
And your parents, were they born in, or did they find the religion, or did one bring the other in?
So they were born into it. However, my dad grew up conservative Jewish. So, right. For example, so he and his brother, maybe all of his siblings, maybe it was just him and his brother, went to what is called Jewish day school after, like in the afternoons after public school, where he would go to like learn more about Judaism and its rules and stuff. So when he was little, I believe his parents would like drive to the synagogue on the Sabbath, which is not something that Orthodox Judaism allows. You're not allowed to, we'll talk about Sabbath in a second, but you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to use electronics and on the Sabbath, which is basically from sundown on Friday until nighttime on Saturday. It's about a 25-hour period. And so he would see his mom, in the 60s, using an electric can opener to open the can of orange juice concentrate for breakfast the next morning, Friday night, and would come home. And this is a particular story I remember him telling, and come home and say, oh, hey, Mom, I learned at Hebrew day school that you're not allowed to use electronics on Shabbos, which is how we say Sabbath. And she was like, oh, really? Huh? Wow. I didn't know that. Okay. Well, I guess we'll stop using it. And there was a period of time where like, well, they were allowed to watch TV, but only his mom was allowed to change the channel, and like the boys could, but the girls could, or something. Some weird like bridge compromise kind of thing, until eventually they, stopped. And over time, his whole immediate family became, I would say, basically modern Orthodox, and his late brother eventually became Hasidic, ultra-Orthodox. So, I had an aunt and uncle and many, many cousins who lived in Brooklyn, and they were all ultra Orthodox. So they were much, 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 much stricter than our family and our community was. Right. And they were the kinds who, all the men were basically wearing essentially a black suit and a white shirt and a black hat every day. And that was like the uniform. Whereas I would go to school and I would wear, button down flannel shirts, collared shirts, but they could have colors and patterns and, corduroy pants or whatever, just as long as they weren't denim jeans and, no shorts at school. But so there was a dress code, but no uniform for me. My mom was born into essentially modern Orthodox Judaism, but the way that Orthodox Judaism has looked century to century and country to country has changed and evolved greatly over the millennia. So when my mom was growing up, for example, hechshers, the symbols you could look for on packaged foods, didn't exist. It wasn't an industry. You would look at the ingredients if they were listed and try to figure out whether it was kosher. And if it seemed okay, then you could just eat it. It wasn't really that complicated, So I remember when I was growing up, my mom told me that when she was a little girl, she used to eat Tootsie Rolls, which are not kosher. They don't have a hechsher. They have some kind of gelatin probably or something in them. And so when I was growing up, I had never had a Tootsie Roll. I would see commercials for them, and I would see them in the supermarket.
Yeah.
And at one point, my mom was like, "Oh yeah, well, we didn't know that they weren't kosher when I was growing up, so I used to have them, and they were my favorite. They were so great. I love them so much." And it was almost like she was flaunting it to me. I'm sure this is not how it was intended, but for me, I was like, "Oh God, I'm so jealous."
Maybe she was like dangling like maybe a little suggestion out there.
No.
Oh.
I'm sure she wasn't. I'm sure she was just trying to show off and like brag a little bit. Ooh, look what I got to do. You can't do it, but I got to do it. Kind of feeling. So it was definitely a different world, but they were both more or less born into, kind of what the version of what I grew up with kind of looked like in America when they were growing up.
Okay. And would that make you like a fourth generation?
No, I would say, so my parents were both born in America.
Okay.
But one grandfather was born in Hungary, and he had, I forget how many exactly, it was something like 12, 13, 15 siblings. All but one were killed by the Nazis in the Holocaust.
Oh my goodness.
One sister survived. This grandfather got out. He was kind of the black sheep. Actually, one of his siblings died before the Holocaust out of starvation because he wasn't eating, because he was just studying Jewish stuff, Judaica, all day and night, and he just died of hunger. I think the story. So that's the kind of community he came from. But he was the black sheep walking around with brass knuckles and stuff. And so he got out of Hungary. He came to America. I forget if he came to America first. I think he may have actually gone to Palestine first. Of course, this was before, the state of Israel was formed. Then he came to America. He joined the army. He became a paratrooper and liberated concentration camps. So we had photos.
Oh my goodness!
A photo in my house of him standing with like people he was liberating from concentration camps. So he was a really tough army guy, and as far as I understand, very emotionally abusive to my mom and her 4 sisters, because he was, he went through the Holocaust and all of his family was killed, and he was an army guy, and so he ran his family like a boot camp.
Oh my gosh!
So that was, as far as I understand, terrifying for my mom and her sisters. Not to speak for her too much, but that's the impression I got. So that was one grandfather. So he's from Hungary, and my other grandfather, if I remember correctly, I think he and his brother came over from Russia when they were like really little. One of my grandmothers came over from Czechoslovakia when it was still Czechoslovakia, before it was Czech Republic, when she was little. And my other grandmother, I think, was actually I think she was my only grandmother born in the US. And I think one of her parents was from Hungary and the other one was maybe from Poland. I might be getting that wrong.
Wow. So some pretty vast lineage.
Yeah, that's how it tends to go for European Jews, I would say, typically. 3 of my grandparents were immigrants. One was born here. They were all basically Eastern European Jews. So, yeah, both my parents were born here. My dad grew up in Chicago. My mom grew up in LA, and then I think they moved to New York when she was in high school, something like that. And I grew up in New York.
And did you grow up with brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have two older brothers. One is 4 years older than me, and one is 6 years older than me. So I didn't have much of a relationship with them because, if I was in middle school, if I was in like fifth grade, they were in ninth and 11th grade. So we were in very different stages of our lives the whole time. So they had much more of a relationship, and they were much more boyish. They were very, they were more violent and rebellious.
Boisterous.
And they were boisterous. They like to fight. They like to break the rules. As they got older, they like to, whatever, do things you're not allowed to do. But I was always a rules follower. I was my parents, perfect little angel until it turned out that I was gay, and that ruined everything. But I always enjoyed following the rules. I never saw a big, issue with them. I never had that innate temptation for me personally. So I never really had much of a connection with my two older brothers. But yeah.
What about now? Is this something they're still involved in with your parents or not?
I believe they continue to have some form of relationship with my parents, but I have honestly not talked to anyone in my immediate family, my parents or my brothers, in a number of years. So I don't know precisely what they're up to these days.
Oh, that's so unfortunate, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, one of my brothers, at least when I was growing up, he was very much, I would say, he typified toxic masculinity, quote unquote,
Okay.
And so I think he definitely never really understood why I would be gay kind of idea.
Okay.
And so, we had very different, he never did anything like abusive, either emotionally or physically towards me. We just kind of kept away from each other, essentially. It was, we ran in very different circles. And then that's my middle brother. And then my oldest brother, he definitely really values family relationships. But
Okay.
My whole family is very conservative and Republican. And, my oldest brother, I do believe he wants to support me. But for me, it's like, if you vote for someone who wants to take away all recognition of me as a human being or a citizen with full rights,
how can you support me?
Yeah, exactly. I tried to have a relationship with him and with my parents for many, many years. And after the 2016 election in the US, it was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. I was like, you know what, if what I understand to be the two most important points, that like voting points, political points for them, which are support of Israel and not increasing taxes for rich people. If those two things are more important to you than protecting my own physical safety
and your rights and yeah.
It got to a point where I'm like, you know what, it's too difficult, it's too emotionally difficult and toxic for me to actually interact with you at this point, because every time I'm talking to you, I just know that you're throwing me under the bus. And yeah, I tried to get past that for a lot of years, and eventually I was just like, you know what, I'm done. And I would need them to completely politically realign and recognize that everything they put me through religiously was abusive. And they're never, ever going to be able to relate to that or understand that or recognize that. So I don't really have, if they came to me one day and said, I get it now, and I'm so sorry, and I will never vote Republican again. And, forcing you, like bringing you up in this crazy prison structure with all of these rules forced on you throughout the day, every day, is not something you should force on anyone, let alone a child. I would be 100% open to starting to rebuild our relationship. I just don't see them ever being able to actually come to that.
Yeah, I suppose that's a very difficult one as well, because democracy makes it so that we all have the ability, especially in the Western world, to vote
right
how we want to vote, and
Right.
and we're often told that no, and I suppose that I don't know if this is just my echo chamber, but I do tend to see it more with sort of right leaning or far right leaning people who talk about freedom of speech, and it's my vote and I'll use this vote how I want to use it and nobody can tell me otherwise. So there is that angle with that, that your parents should be allowed to vote for who they want, but at the same time there's the whole perspective of you're not just walking around saying I'm a gay man because it's something that you want to say. Like, that is who you are as a person. And it's like me, if I decided to become a vegan tomorrow, it's not the same. It's not like I'm walking around saying I'm a vegan and that's a life choice I've made. So I mean, it's so different for
even so, though, imagine a world in which 100% of people, like bonobos, were completely bisexual, and one individual decides to only have heterosexual relationships and one decides to only have homosexual relationships. No one's hurting anyone. That's not something that it's valid to be against, in my opinion, right? It comes down to the idea of being intolerant of intolerance.
Yes.
Which I strongly believe in, that you should not tolerate intolerance, and you should not tolerate all the various systemic issues we have, especially in the US, but also, everywhere with racism and bigotry and sexism and homophobia and so on and so on and so forth, and transphobia. And, the right to believe whatever you believe and vote however you want to vote is one thing. But, when it starts to infringe on other people's rights and safety, I don't think it is any longer something that is valid to support.
One last message from this month's sponsors, Help You Find Me, a digital If I Go Missing file that is incredibly safe to use and end-to-end encrypted. This means that the only people who can access your personal information are those who have your direct permission. Sharing this digital file with your nearest and dearest not only puts minds at ease, but could also potentially save lives in an emergency by providing key details that are locked away in your personal electronics. For more information, or to start a free trial, or even to receive a 50% discount off of your subscription, visit helpyoufind.me/HYFM cult. That's helpyoufind.me/HYFM cult today.
I mean, bringing it back to Orthodox Judaism, every baby boy is circumcised at 8 days old. And I don't think it is morally right to give elective surgery to anyone without their consent, including and especially babies.
That is an interesting point to make, because I used to work with somebody who had that opinion, and he would often use it to open up a discussion about moral dilemmas. And then if we were working with at-risk children of different cultures who might be put through like vaginal trauma, then there was that big discussion around whether if we're trying to protect female children from female genital mutilation, should we then be looking to do the same with young boys who were having their foreskins removed, and it was always one of those heated debates within the office, because we'd be going backwards and forwards with, but this and that and this and that, and it's different because of this, and is it different because of that? And so yeah, it's interesting that you make that point.
Yeah, to my perspective, of course, accepting medical issues, there are 100% valid reasons that circumcisions need to be performed for medical reasons. But if there's no medical reason to do so, I don't think it's ethical to do that to anyone. I think it's absolutely fine for people to make that decision themselves for their own bodies. I'm not against it inherently as I don't know, an aesthetic choice or whatever. But that's I don't know. It's this argument where, well, we can't critique it because it's someone's culture. Yeah. And I don't think that is inherently a valid argument.
No, and that was kind of the point that was often made around should there be authorities intervening in things
right
around FGM? Should there be people get it, social services, should they get involved when there's the potential of that happening, because the families involved, it's part of their culture, but because they've moved to a country where that's not accepted and not within the boundaries of our law over here, is that, and so it's the same as you're saying, like, just because it's part of one culture, is it something that should be accepted universally? And I think I think it's a hard one to answer, because there's so many yeses and nos for both sides. But just going back to that point before about voting, I think the main point that I was trying to make is that everybody is free to vote how they want to, but when it came to that 2016 election, like, your family shouldn't have wanted to have voted for the person that was voted in with the beliefs that he had, the misogyny, the homophobia.
As far as I understand, I don't think my parents voted for president. I believe they abstained. They, as indoctrinated Republicans, they hate Hillary with every fiber of their being. But so they couldn't possibly vote for her. But but at that stage, I don't think they liked Trump either. And so I think they just essentially did not vote for president. That's my impression. I could be wrong. But anyway, but regardless, yeah.
And what about your education? You mentioned that you grew up surrounded by other Jewish children who were from various different sects of Judaism. But
I wouldn't say that. I mean, well, okay. So I went to yeshiva, which is an Orthodox Jewish school system. So everyone who was going to my school, all the students, were also Orthodox Jewish. Also, I went to an all-boys school. There are co-ed Orthodox Jewish yeshivas, but I would say they're on the rarer side, and they're definitely more on the quote-unquote modern end of the spectrum, right? More on the sort of left-leaning end of the spectrum. My parents considered co-ed yeshivas to be a bit scandalous. They didn't understand how that could be a thing that you could do. Anyway, so I went to an all-boys Orthodox Jewish yeshiva school, and what that means is that in the morning you get there and you do morning prayer. So Jewish prayers are done all in Hebrew, and there's a prayer book with all these various prayers, and they're done in a certain order. And if you have at least 10 men of at least age 13, which is bar mitzvah age, which is essentially when sort of all the religious rules really come into effect. So before that time, parents are essentially responsible for their kids. And so if their kids, do something wrong, the kids aren't really held responsible for it. But once they turn 13 for boys and 12 for girls, they are considered to be at least religiously, mature enough to understand the gravity of keeping all these rules, and so they're expected to keep all the rules. So I got off topic, but morning prayer is the first thing at school. Once you reach 13, you need at least 13-year-old boys together to form a minyan, which is like a quorum, which allows you to do certain parts of the prayer service that you wouldn't do by yourself. You can only do if you have at least 10 people there, or 10 boys there. Girls don't count. And I keep getting off track. Getting back to school. Okay, starting over. So Orthodox Jewish Yeshiva school, first thing in the morning is Jewish prayer, or morning prayer, which is in Hebrew, and it takes about a half hour or so. After that, I'd have breakfast real quick, maybe 10, 15 minutes, and typically around 4 or so class periods of Jewish subjects. So that may be Hebrew Bible, that may be Talmud, usually once you get to like middle or high school, that may be prophets or other writings. So these are structured just like any other school class where you have homework and tests and quizzes and things like that. And you're studying out of these either Hebrew or Aramaic texts, kind of translating sentence by sentence. And lunchtime, so that would be like a period. And then in the afternoon, you have all the secular classes. So English and math and science and social studies.
I honestly didn't know if you were going to say that there would be any of that kind of within your education system.
Hold that thought, because that's a separate issue. But in elementary school, my days went to like maybe 4:30 p.m. By middle school, I think they went to about 5 or 5:15. And then by high school, I think my days went to about 6 p.m. And except for Thursdays, which went till I think 7:30, where we would have dinner at school, and then we'd have extra Jewish study after dinner, which didn't have any tests or quizzes or homework or anything. It was just like extra study at extra Jewish time. There's also an afternoon prayer service, which happens, and that's pretty quick. That's like 10 or 15 minutes. And that would happen between a couple periods, essentially, class periods, and it was built into the schedule. And then during the time of year where it would actually get dark early enough, we would also have the evening prayer, which is also pretty quick, 10 or 15 minutes, at the end of the day.
That is
so
full on. That is so full on.
Now, Fridays and Sundays were half days. On Friday, it would be a half day because you had to be able to go home and get ready for the Sabbath, for Shabbos. And, you gotta shower, put on your suit, make sure all the food is ready, blah, 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 blah. And on Sundays, it was also a half day, I think mostly just to make sure that a day of the week did not go by without studying some amount of Jewish stuff, some amount of like Torah or whatever. And so compared to public schools, we actually had one fewer day per week where we were studying the secular subjects, right? We didn't have Fridays. So there are a lot of state tests, at least in New York State, they're called the regents. So for example, at the end of the year, the math class you take, let's say in 9th grade, there's a state test you take at the end of the year to essentially get credits for having taken that class. So you have to pass that test in order to move on to the next grade. And so public school students would have 5 days a week of studying this, math, like sequential one, I think was the name of the math class we had in 9th grade for us. And then you could move on to the 10th grade, like sequential 2. And so we had less time to study those curricula, right? Which was difficult. And we had, as I said, homework and tests and quizzes for all of our Jewish classes on top of the homework and tests and quizzes we had for the secular classes. So on top of, English and science and math and, writing essays and reports and so on. We had all that for the Jewish classes as well. I believe 18 minutes, there's that number 18 again, 18 minutes, I think, before sundown on Friday night. And it ends when 3 stars are visible in the sky on Saturday night. So because of how, sunset and sunrise changes every day, week to week, the start time and the end time changes. And Orthodox Jews have calendars that have the particular candle lighting. You light special Shabbos candles to sort of start Shabbos, to bring it in, bring in the Shabbos on Friday, and the time when it is considered to be over on Saturday night. So, way back when, you'd actually have to go outside and see if you could see 3 stars in order to know that Shabbos is over. But these days, people can look at their watches and say, oh, well, it's 6:18, and that's the time it ends this week. So anyway, during this approximately 25-hour period of time, depending on where you live, a lot of things are not allowed to be done. There are 36 categories of what is usually translated as work, but is not literally work. That is where you might have heard, don't work on the Sabbath come from.
Mm-hmm.
So these 36 categories of quote unquote work or creative activity are based on 36 activities that were done in the biblical story of the Jews living in the desert after the Exodus from Egypt and before they got to Israel, when they assemble and disassemble the Mishkan, which was a sort of mobile temple where they could bring sacrifices and do, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so there are various things, activities like all the various steps of farming. So planting, sowing, reaping, harvesting, like all of these things, reaping and harvesting, probably the same thing. But all these things are like different activities. Building a fire, extinguishing a fire, building a structure, destroying a structure, writing, painting, or writing or coloring are different activities. Buying and selling. So there are these 36 categories, and then they are extrapolated out from them. In fact, in 10th grade, one of my Jewish classes was specifically Shabbos, the religious laws of the Sabbath. And so, it became all of these hypotheticals, like I was mentioning earlier with the Talmud, where you might say, okay, you're not allowed to color on Shabbos. You're not allowed to change the color of something. So that comes from dyeing curtains, I think, something like that.
Wow.
And so, okay, let's say someone spills some wine or some grape juice at the Shabbos table, and you have some white napkins, and you want to sop it up, and you are coloring the white napkins purple when you clean up the spill. Is that okay? That's one of these hypothetical extrapolations that we had a whole class, one school year class, one scholastic year class, all about all these different various situations of, okay, what are you allowed to do? What's the law? Blah, blah, blah. So you cannot, for example, drive because of the combustion in the engine, which is the fire, right? You cannot cook anything. Everything that you eat on Shabbos needs to have been cooked beforehand. Although if you leave your stove on, which is typical, it's normal for Orthodox Jews to leave the stove on very low with a metal sheet, not sheet like a aluminum foil, but like a sort of a slightly more tough kind of thin metal sheet that goes over the stove called a blech. If you have that on top of the stove and the stove is turned down low, you just leave that on all Shabbos. And so if you have something that's already cooked, like a big pot of cholent, which is kind of like a Jewish chili, Jewish stew, every family has their own recipe for it. You can just leave that on the stove and it'll keep warm until the Friday night meal. And then likewise, if you wanted to heat anything up on Saturday for the Saturday afternoon, like Shabbos lunch meal, anything that's already completely cooked, you're not changing its like chemistry at all. You can put it on the stove on top of the blech and warm it up a bit. You can warm things up, but you cannot heat them, and you can't like turn the fire up or down, right? You can't touch it. Likewise, you can't use electricity, so you can't turn on or off lights. So for example, if you need the bathroom light to be on at any point during Shabbos, you need to make sure to leave that on before Shabbos starts, and make sure that out of habit, when you are leaving the bathroom, you don't turn it off by mistake, because A, that's not allowed, and then B, you can't turn it back on again. So now you don't have a light in the bathroom anymore until Shabbos is over.
I don't know how, oh my goodness, I'm so overwhelmed just listening to all of this.
So this happens every week, every single week. And let me tell you, when I was growing up, all the best shows were on Friday night, and I couldn't watch any of them. And the mythical Saturday morning cartoons, I never saw them. You can't watch TV on Shabbos. No. So, and besides, I would have been at the synagogue at Shul, which is what we called it, which I think is a Yiddish word. I would have been at Shul on Saturday mornings, praying for 3+ hours. So
Oh my
I wouldn't have been able to
goodness.
watch the cartoons anyway, even if that had been allowed. So yes, in fact, you are not also, one of the other things you're not allowed to do is carry anything outside the home. So you're allowed to carry things around inside your home, but you can't, for example, take a bag with you if you're walking over to your friend's house. Now, some people may be familiar with some neighborhoods, for example, in New York, like in Brooklyn and on Long Island, that have a pole, like a series of poles and strings that kind of go around the neighborhood. And it's like, what are these weird things? That's called an eruv. And it's essentially a loophole, as almost all of Orthodox Judaism is, a series of loopholes that says, okay, if you create this flimsy structure around an area, you can treat the whole area as one property. And so you can carry stuff around in it. And so any community where there is a large enough concentration of Orthodox Jews, they will have an eruv built so that you can, for example, carry your talis, which is like a prayer shawl, over to the shul, the synagogue, on Saturday mornings, rather than having to, like, I don't know, leave it there.
Oh my goodness.
And likewise, if you're walking over to a friend's house for Shabbos lunch, you can put your kid in a stroller and push it if there's an eruv, but not if there's no eruv, or likewise carrying a baby or whatever. So yeah, there's all these things. The things you're allowed to do on Shabbos are eat, sleep, pray, read, play board games or cards, as long as there's no electronic component or writing or anything.
What about if you're playing cards for money?
Oh, you're not allowed to touch money. So touching, so here's another fence around a fence. There's a concept called muktzah, which is essentially if an item's essential use is an activity that's not allowed on Shabbos, for example, money, because you're not allowed to buy or sell, that item is considered muktzah, which means you're not allowed to touch it because you might come to use it for its intended use, which is not allowed. That's one of these fences around the law. And so if you have a hammer, for example, you're not allowed to do construction, you can't hammer in nails, so you can't touch a hammer because its intended use is something you're not allowed to do. However, if before Shabbos you say, hey, this hammer I actually use to prop up the window to keep it open, as long as you're making a mental note of that, and you're like taking this hammer and you're like setting it by the window, then you can touch it on Shabbos because it has its new intended use, which is something that is allowed, keeping the window open, that's fine. So there's all these different
This reminds me of like when you're a kid and you make up like rules to a game, like when you're playing tag,
right,
and you're all running around, and then you have your home base, and then somebody else gets tagged, and then they say, no, I haven't been tagged because this is the new home base, and it's like you're just
it's like a game of Calvin ball.
It's like whatever's convenient, you just changing things as you go, if you know what. And
yes,
I don't want that to sound like I'm undermining anybody's religious beliefs at all.
Oh, that's okay. I'll do it for you.
Just to me, hearing this from your perspective, and I know that there will be plenty of other people out there who don't, as you said at the beginning, have the perspective that you have. But just from the way that you're describing it to me, it almost feels like things are just changed kind of, or like just out of convenience.
I mean, yes, but very slowly. Like over the course of millennia.
Yeah.
There are so many exceptions to so many things. So as an example, you're not allowed to waste seed, quote unquote. And that refers to basically for a man to ejaculate anywhere but inside his wife's vagina. You're not allowed to do that. So masturbation is not allowed.
Birth control is not allowed.
Birth control, if it's something that is like a pill, is fine because you're still
not
ejaculating
wasting the seed, right? Okay,
so that's fine. But for example, condoms are not. Okay. So, but the thing is, if you go to your rabbi and you say, hey, we've already fulfilled the mitzvah of having one boy and one girl, that's like the commandment or whatever.
How can that be? What? How can that be? Oh my God.
So let's say you go to your rabbi and you and your wife, I'm obviously talking from a man's perspective, say, we've already fulfilled the mitzvah. We really don't have the money to support another child. But there's a separate commandment that once a week, a man has to, quote unquote, pleasure his wife. And so essentially it's expected, usually on Shabbos, that you'll have sex, assuming the wife is not on her period. So about 2 weeks out of the month, you're not allowed to touch at all, like even hold hands, but that's a separate topic. Assuming that she's not on her period, you're expected to have sex, but you don't want to have another kid because you wouldn't be able to support it financially. You can go to your rabbi and get heter, like an exception, like a permission essentially, that says, okay, well, the rabbi, which is where the rabbi says, okay, I've heard your case essentially, and I understand where you're coming from, and I explicitly give you permission to, use contraception, to use condoms or whatever. So there are plenty of people who do use contraception, depending on their situation, depending on what a rabbi has decided. There is a lot of that where the letter of the law might be one thing, but you could always go to your rabbi and talk about it. And he might say, okay, well, as long as you do X, Y, Z in some particular strange way, it shows you're giving it your best effort to, fulfill the laws. But because we recognize that this is, extenuating circumstances, you personally have permission to do something else or to do it a different way. So in a weird way, there is some flexibility. But I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's like flexible, but
no, if I was going to convert to Judaism tomorrow, I would not even know where to start. You can have sex, but don't have sex, but do have sex, but don't.
Right.
But if you do, you should definitely ask someone if you can. And if you can, then you shouldn't do it.
That sounds like all of Judaism, yes. Orthodox Judaism.
It's anyway. Like so overwhelming for me to hear all of this. And
no, there's a lot.
You've had your doubts growing up in the religion, and something must change as you get older for you to realize that walking away is something that you're absolutely going to do.
Right. Yeah.
What is that moment? Do you remember what it is exactly?
Well, growing up, after I realized I was gay, I mean, I was always attracted to other boys, but once I learned, the terms like gay and straight and whatever, in like middle school, and I realized all that, I still believed in Orthodox Judaism, but at some point, maybe by high school, I was like, okay, well, I don't want to be celibate or not be able to date or like have a husband or whatever one day.
Yeah.
I mean, this was before gay marriage existed, so I don't know that I was thinking of it in those terms, but I want to have a life partner.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Once I grow up, I will probably stop being religious, because another part of Orthodox Judaism is it believes that there are kind of two main categories of law: laws that are between man and God, and laws that are between man and man. So the laws that are between man and God are the things like saying prayers. It's a commandment that you personally are expected to do. It doesn't affect any other human person around you, right? It's just between you and God. Mm-hmm. And then there's between man and man, and that's stuff like giving to charity or whatever, stuff that's actually affecting your relationship with other people. And so in my mind, I was like, okay, well, even if I break all of the laws between man and God, and like I don't keep the kosher laws, and I don't keep Shabbos, I'm still going to I intend to be a good person, hopefully all the stuff between like me and other people, I'll still be good with. And, once I die, God will judge me, and hopefully I'll be not deemed terribly terrible, and it's going to be worth it, because I'll get to like not be lonely and alone my whole life, right? So I had come to that conclusion at some point in maybe high school or early high school. Mm-hmm. But it's definitely what drove the impetus for me to search for answers and better understand Judaism. And over time, I learned more and more about how Orthodox Judaism has evolved from what Judaism used to look like, hundreds, thousands of years ago, to what it looks like today, and how it's changed. And the more I researched, the less I believed in it. And it was in stages where at some point I was like, well, maybe Orthodox Judaism isn't quite the most similar to what biblical Judaism looked like. Maybe it would have looked something more like conservative Judaism. And eventually I was like, well, okay, I still believe in God, but I'm not 100% sure that Judaism is even really like the quote unquote one true religion.
Right.
And eventually I became agnostic and was like, well, I guess I don't really know if I believe in God or not, but I mean, I think I do because blah, blah, blah. Like a lot of the arguments that had been drilled into me growing up,
Yeah.
I still believed. Things like, you can't have a watch without a watchmaker is one of the like old tales that I would hear about, like
Right.
the rabbi, who's like, you can't have a world without someone who created the world. And then eventually in college, I read The God Delusion, which had come out about that time, the book by Richard Richard Dawkins. And that finishing that book is what really pushed me from agnosticism to atheism. And I was like, oh, okay, I feel like I have permission. I've been convinced that it is totally reasonable to stop believing in this and to not even like leave any room for doubt. I mean, there's so much, like, he's got plenty of issues. He's not a great guy. And that has all, been established. But just talking about the book, there are so many really great pieces of information in there that really opened my eyes to how reasonable it is to be atheist. For example, everyone's an atheist about almost every god that has ever been invented. Every Jew or Christian is an atheist with regards to Thor and Wotan and so on and so forth. Certainly all Jews are atheist when it comes to Jesus. And, to quote the book, he's like, I just go one God further, right? Like everyone's, a lot of people are left with this one God that they can't stop believing in. And I just also don't believe in that one. And that was like, for me, that was like, head explode.
Yeah.
Like, wow, that does sound very reasonable to me. So yeah, at that point I identified as atheist and I was like, okay, yeah, no, I don't believe in any of this anymore.
And when you were growing up, did you have kind of any outside influence? Did you have any friendships or people that you met as you kind of went through life that maybe didn't have a Jewish affiliation and gave you a different perspective on things?
Well, so the summer after 10th grade, I went to a quote unquote creative day camp out on Long Island called USDAN. And I was not doing dance or singing or anything like that. I was actually taking web design and painting / drawing. And that was the first time I had ever been someplace where I could actually associate with someone who wasn't Orthodox Jewish. Because of course, everyone going to my school was Orthodox Jewish. Everyone in my family was Orthodox Jewish. Obviously, everyone at my shul, my synagogue, was Orthodox Jewish. It was really not approved to socialize with people who aren't Orthodox Jewish, even Jews who were just not Orthodox, like conservative Jews. Like growing up, my parents still had one or two friendships with, I think, more like conservative, I think probably Jews from like before they got married or before they had kids, that eventually they just kind of stopped associating with as I grew up, as they became more, strict. But anyway, I did not have any of those relationships. And in fact, I remember one time in middle school, during summer vacation, I walked over to the local video game store and was buying Pokemon cards or something, or something. I was literally buying Pokemon cards. And there were a couple of boys there who were definitely not Orthodox Jewish. They were not Jewish at all. And they were also talking about Pokemon. And so we were all talking about Pokemon, and we ended up playing Pokemon cards on the floor of the video game store. And it was super fun and cool. And I had mentioned it to my mom, and she got really, really nervous. She's like, you didn't tell them where we live, did you? And I was like, what? I mean, no, I didn't like give them our address or whatever. Like, what's the big deal? And she's like, well, I don't think it's appropriate for you to be, hanging out with non-Jewish boys, whatever. And so like that was one brush I had with it. But getting back to the summer after 10th grade, that was the first time I actually had an opportunity to make friends with people who weren't Orthodox Jewish. And that's actually when I made my first IRL gay friend, whose name was Michelle, and she and I are still very good friends. And it turned out she lived, fairly close by to where I lived. And she was also Jewish, although completely unaffiliated, quote unquote, culturally Jewish. So her family was definitely atheist, but she and her parents were Jewish.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
At least like by like ethnically or ancestrally or however you'd like to define that. So she was one of the first people like IRL that I ever came out to. And that friendship was very, very, very important for me. And so we kept up online through like AOL Instant Messenger that school year, during 11th grade. And then the next summer, she had told me about a program at NYU where high school students could take like an introductory college class for college credits while they're still in high school. And so I took an art class, like an Art 101 class, and she was taking a couple of classes as well. And so that summer I got to go into Manhattan like 3 times a week for these classes. And she was also going, and we got to hang out. And again, because I hadn't seen her in person since the previous summer. And I believe because she was Jewish, even though she was not Orthodox, and because she was a girl, my parents, I had come back to them in 10th grade.
I didn't even think about that. Oh no.
I believe my parents were much more permissive with my being allowed to hang out with her than they ever would have been with my brothers hanging out with any girls.
Oh, I thought you were going to say that they were going to encourage you to marry her.
Oh, I'm sure they would have loved that. I'm 100% sure they would have loved that. Yeah. In fact, it had been not so subtly hinted at, like, oh yeah, so
right,
you're getting pretty close, huh? Hey, how about that, right? Girls, huh? Right? And I'm like,
Jewish girls.
Yeah, even better, right? But I'm like, no, we're just friends because I'm still gay. That's still.
It's like, still not a choice. It's still not a life. It's still not a life choice. Like, oh, look at me being a vegan. It's like it's not.
Yeah, but it worked out for me in that I got to hang out with her, and then the summer after 11th grade, I got to, she introduced me to a bunch of her friends who were also not Orthodox Jewish. Some of them were Jewish, but some of them were not, I believe. And so I made more non-Orthodox Jewish friends. And then the next school year, during 12th grade, I actually continued hanging out with them, like maybe on Saturday nights or Sunday afternoons or whatever. That was super, super, super important to me. That was like a lifeline. Yeah. Because I got to actually talk about and like vent about the various issues I had been having with my parents. Because we can touch on this a bit now, actually. When I came out, I originally came out to my dad in 10th grade. I was really, really, really mopey because I had this huge crush on this boy in my school, and like there's no way to even find out whether he was gay or straight and so on. And so I was just a very teenage angst kind of thing. And my dad was just getting fed up with it. And he essentially like forced me out. He's just like, you have to tell me what's wrong. Like, you're not leaving the dinner table until you tell me what's wrong. And I eventually, it was terrible. And I told him, and I broke down crying, and he like hugged me, and basically he just thought it was a phase. So he was comforting me because he's like, yeah, okay, sure, gay, quote unquote, right? You're in 10th grade, you don't know anything, you don't know what's going on. And I'm like, okay. So that was like at first comforting, and then almost immediately he was like, well, I was also a late bloomer myself. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Right, yeah, the other shoe drops.
Yeah. And then not too long after that, I was like, well, I was like, okay, don't tell mom yet, kind of thing. And he was like, okay, because my parents my family's very good with keeping secrets from each other for, whatever unhealthy reasons. And so I was like, okay, well, I got to tell her. So I eventually told her over like winter break during 10th grade. And one of the things she said was, well, the psychic I go to, who reads tea leaves, told me that you're not really gay. You just think you are. So it's fine. Don't worry about it. Like, you'll grow out of it. And I'm like, I do not know what to do with that. That is, I'm pretty sure, would be considered witchcraft in Orthodox Judaism, and absolutely not allowed, but like, whatever, I guess. And so, yeah. And then, she was like, well, regardless of whether you are or you're not, it's not, as I said before, it's no excuse not to remain Orthodox Jewish, marry a girl, have kids. And I'm like, okay, well, none of that stuff is happening. So anyway, my relationship with my parents rapidly declined at that point. And yeah, so that.
And is there a point where you tell them that you no longer will be practicing Judaism?
So actually, I believe when I was in 11th grade, I was on the way to the DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles, to get my learner's permit to start practicing driving. My mom was driving me there, and actually, I had asked, or no, I guess, yeah, no, this was in 11th grade. I asked my mom if it would be okay for me to continue hanging out with Michelle and her group of friends, and she was like, well, I mean, Lonnie, you're very honest. I trust you. Do you think they would be a negative influence on you? Do you think you would be tempted to, like, if they were going somewhere not kosher, to go along with them and like eat non-kosher food or like whatever? And I'm like, well, I mean, there's two parts to that. On the one hand, no, I don't think I'd be like peer pressured to do something I didn't want to do. But on the other hand, I don't see myself as being Orthodox when I grow up and like move out. Like, I thought that was implied when I came out as gay. I thought it was obvious to everyone involved that, okay, I'm gay. When I grow up, I'm not going to be religious anymore, right?
And I'm still going to be gay.
Yeah, like I just figured that that went without saying. And so of course it didn't. And she freaked out and was like, oh my God, you dropped this bombshell on me. So that was terrible. That was the first time it was touched upon. Now, when I went to college, a little bit of background on that. Basically, everyone that I grew up with went to Israel for a year after high school to go to yeshiva to spend more time being further indoctrinated, studying more Jewish stuff. And it was also I would say, a very like Zionist, oh gosh, what do you call it? When like gap year?
Yeah.
So it's basically a gap year, but so it's like a year off because it's not like there are any tests or quizzes or anything. It's not proper school, as far as I understand, right? But you're living in a dorm and you're studying a lot of Jewish stuff all the time, and there's time where you can go out and do some like touring around and socializing and stuff. But mostly you're at the yeshiva and you're living there. And it's a year where you get further indoctrinated. There's a term used, at least when I was growing up, I don't know if they still use this term, called flipping out, which is when somebody goes to Israel for the year, comes home 10 times more religious and strict than they were when they left.
Wow.
And so it's like, oh, hey, do you think so-and-so is going to flip out? You think he's going to come back and be wearing a black hat and like wearing his tzitzis out of his pants and all that? Oh, no, I don't see that. Oh, yeah, definitely, whatever. That tends to wear off after a year or two, after they've come back a year or two later. But sometimes it doesn't. And then also some people, they stay for more than a year. They'll stay for a second or even a third year, but most people are just there for 1 year. So on the one hand, it's further religious indoctrination. And a lot of people get much, much, much more like genuinely into it. A lot of people who are just going through the motions will become much more actually emotionally invested and personally, even much more strongly.
Okay, yeah.
But the other side of it is really drilling in this idea that Israel is your birthright. That's where this trip, the birthright trip name, comes from.
Right.
Which is, if you don't know, there's an organization that funds free trips for Jews who have never been to Israel to take like a week or two trip to Israel where they do tourism, and they get a lot of like Zionist indoctrination, and they get a lot of like convincing to marry a Jew and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But anyway, so yeah, spending a year in yeshiva, it's very much like this place belongs to you. It's been our homeland for thousands of years, and it was stolen from us, and we need to like keep it. And so these are the two, I would say, main points of going to yeshiva for a year. I was going to have to do that, as literally everyone in my grade, which was only like 50 kids because it's a small school, everyone in my grade went to Israel for a year except for one of my friends and me. And I was going to be forced to go there, but actually sort of at the 11th hour, one of my rabbis at school, because the people who teach the Jewish subjects are rabbis, managed to convince my parents that if they send me against my will, it'll backfire and it'll have the reverse effect. So they said, you should let Lonnie go to college instead, but make sure that he is living somewhere where there's a place he can go for Sabbath services and meals every week.
Okay.
Which means you have to be walking distance because you're not allowed to drive on Shabbos, as well as having some schedule of learning Jewish stuff over the phone with a rabbi, at least once or twice a week, to make sure he's keeping up with all that stuff. And so, if you're paying, so if they're paying for my college, which they were, they could still keep me under their thumb by making sure I'm going to services and meals every week I went to a Chabad house. Chabad is a branch of Orthodox Judaism that's very committed to what's called kiruv work, which is like proselytization, but specifically only for Jews. So Jews who are not particularly religious, to get them to be more religious. They do not go outside their religion. They just try to get people who are already like ethnically Jewish to become more religious. So, but they're very open-minded, they're very non-judgmental. And so making sure that there's a place I could go for that, and that I'm expected to keep all the rules.
I'm happy to hear about the reasonable rabbi.
Yeah, so I was, still pretending to be Orthodox Jewish whenever I would go there, because that's how I was introduced to them, by my parents. And I didn't want to let anything on. And so I would have to go there every week, for Friday night and Saturday afternoon stuff, or Saturday morning stuff. And, but otherwise I moved from New York to Arizona. So my parents weren't physically there. Now, of course, I couldn't, I had like a credit card I could use for like getting groceries or whatever, but like I knew that I couldn't use it anywhere non-kosher because it would show up on the statement that my parents were paying.
Yeah.
Likewise, this was in the days of text messages that you would get charged for. And there could be like a time. I didn't even know if there was like a timestamp on the bill of like when a text was sent. So I'm like, well, I can't use my phone on Shabbos.
And you used to get the letter through the post that would have like all the numbers that you'd called and how long you were on the phone for. Oh my goodness!
So I had to be very paranoid about everything I did to make sure it couldn't be traced back to me by my parents, for that they might find out if I was ever breaking any rules. Now, of course, I was breaking a ton of rules and telling them that I wasn't, because in my mind, I'm like, this is crazy that they're expecting me to like remain completely Orthodox Jewish out here. And then, so about a year into my college experience, I was going year round. My college had summer semesters you could take and basically get a whole semester's worth of credits if you wanted. So like most kids would go home for the summer, but some would stay and just like, if they want to
power
get through it quickly. Yeah. So I was doing that mostly because I didn't want to go home. Well, half because I didn't want to go back to my parents' home for the summer. And then half also because the faster I got through college, the faster I could get independent. So anyway, it was my fourth semester, but it was my second fall semester of the year. It was about a year in that I had a part-time job that I was working 20 hours a week. And I was taking a lot of credits, like 21 credits, because I was trying to get through it quickly.
Wow, yeah, absolutely.
And so in the fall, there are these high holy days, is what they're called. So that's stuff like Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur, which is like a very, very solemn fast day where you're fasting all day and you're praying all day.
Wow.
And there's Sukkot, which is another holiday. Anyway, they all happen within, a period of a couple months or so in the fall. And, two of these holidays are like 8 days long, and one of them, and the other one's a couple days long. So you could potentially end up missing 2 or 3 weeks of school and work, depending on how they fall out on the calendar, because it's all based on a Jewish lunar calendar. And I was trying to be more honest with my parents. And like at some point I told my dad, like, look, I want you to know I don't wear my yarmulke except when I go to the Chabad house. And he was like, well, obviously I'm unhappy to hear that, but I appreciate that you're being honest with me. And so, because like there's precedent for Orthodox Jews who work in industries or sectors where they feel like there could be a risk of anti-Semitism to not wear their yarmulke to work. So that's a thing that is done. It's not like a crazy thing to do in general. So, I told him that, and he wasn't happy about it. Certainly, I mean, he was upset about it, but he didn't get like angry. He was like, look, that's upsetting, but thanks for telling me. So I felt like I was slowly starting to like ease open this this doorway for us. And so anyway, I was like, I think I wrote them an email. I was like, hey, I really appreciate everything that you're doing, supporting me, helping me go through college, blah, blah, blah. But, I need you to know that I won't be able to completely observe all the high holy days this year because, I've got a part-time job. I've got all these classes. Like, I just can't lose that much time. I'll lose my job and I'll blah, blah, blah. I'll, have a really hard time with the classes. And I figured they would be really upset, but that, we could get through it. But the response was essentially that they were like, if you do not observe these holidays, we're cutting you off. It's over. We're done.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
And so I went through a mad scramble to try and figure out how I could possibly pay for the rest of my college tuition by myself. Could I get loans? No, I was too young. How much money could I make per month if I worked full time? Not nearly enough. How much was my rent? How much would I spend on food? I looked into scholarships and everything, and there was just no way. If they cut me off, I would basically have to drop out of school. And so I was really at the end of I was at my wit's end, and I didn't know what to do. And I was at the Chabad house that Friday night because I had to be, and I was in the process of trying to figure out what to do. I had met with the financial aid department at my school, and I went to talk to the rabbi's wife, who she was basically the only one I ever really talked to at the Chabad house. She was just very easy to talk to, and everyone else there were like these college state school students who were like very just like sorority fraternity sorts of folks. They were the type of people who attended sports games, and like they're very normal. They were not my people.
Okay.
And they were also like, they didn't know almost anything about Orthodox Judaism. They were like very, very slowly being introduced to it by the Chabad house and learning about prayers and learning about traditions. And I'm like, I was forged in the fires of this stuff. Like, like I don't need to learn any more about it. Like I'm fine. I'm good. I'm fine.
Yeah. So, please.
Yeah. So I didn't really relate to any of them. But anyway, I basically just talked to the rabbi's wife. So that Friday night, I pulled her aside. I was like, hey, can we talk? And she was like, yeah, what's up? And like, she didn't realize, for example, one week I didn't go. And I was like, if somebody asks, like, I'll just say I was feeling under the weather. And my mom called me and she was like, how was the Chabad last week? And I was like, oh, I don't know, normal, fine, I guess. And she's like, really? Because so-and-so told me that you weren't there. She was worried. And I was like, oh, right. Yeah, I didn't go last weekend. I was feeling under the weather. And she's like, Lonnie, you have to go every week. Like, she was checking in on me via the rabbi's wife. Yeah. And the rabbi's wife thought that my mom was just being polite and pleasant and like thanking her for like keeping an eye on me, like in a
because he's there on his own and I'm worried.
Yeah, right. Exactly. In sort of a maternal way. And so the rabbi's wife did not realize that was my mom's way of spying on me, as if my mom wasn't also calling me multiple times per week and would get mad if I didn't talk to her frequently enough, right? So anyway, this Friday night, getting back to the story, I was talking to the rabbi's wife and I just laid it all out to her. I was like, look, obviously I grew up Orthodox. I'm not Orthodox anymore. I'm gay. My parents are threatening to cut me off if I don't observe all the high holy days. I don't know what to do, but I just, wanted to be honest with you and let you know what's happening for me. And she was like, honey, I'm so sorry you're dealing with all that. If you don't want to come to the Chabad, you don't have to come. I'm not we're not forcing you to come. And I'm like, you don't understand. If I don't come, I get cut off. Like, I don't have a choice. And she's like, no, Lonnie, if you don't want to come, don't come. It's fine. And I'm like, but if my mom asks you if I was here,
you can't lie for me.
Are you gonna lie for me? And she was like, she took a beat and she thought about it. And she was like, yes.
Oh,
yeah, I'll do that for you. And I was like, boom, head explode. And I was like, oh my God, you're saving my life. This is incredible. And so from then on, she covered for me essentially. And I did continue going there at least to check in and say hi on Friday nights, just to like, because it was no longer being forced on me, and it was so much more comfortable. And I was able to keep my part-time job, and I was able to go to all my classes, and I got away with it, and eventually got through all of college, and I ended up getting a job teaching English in Japan, and I moved to Japan and was financially independent. And at that point, my relationship with my parents was like, look, I am totally willing and open to have a relationship with you that is respectful, but like you are no longer able to force me to live my life in any particular way. So you have to take me for me. So, you know, we tried to do that for a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, it didn't quite work out. I will say they made a lot of progress before I finally called it quits, but it was too little. It was too little, too slowly. Yeah.
Oh, that's Japan. I mean, I know that in Japan there's Shinto and Buddhism. What's the Jewish presence like over there? Is it just something that you didn't really come across?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in Japan, people generally aren't really familiar with Judaism. There is a Chabad in Tokyo and there is a Chabad in Kyoto, or at least there was when I lived there. But you know, I believe there's a very, 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 very small.
You'd be surprised to see somebody that you could tell was Jewish and be like,
yeah,
oh.
I mean, unless they were a tourist, you know. But Japan is extremely homogenous, and you know, it's oh gosh, I just forgot what I was about to say. Yeah, they're not really familiar with
That's the story that you've just told there, though. It's going back to sort of this gap year that everybody is encouraged to take, where they go visit Israel for a year, and you know, it's inspires them to become more committed to their spiritual cause or calling. You know, it's their heritage, it's their ancestors, and all of this. And then you've got this reasonable rabbi who says, you know, I don't think Lonnie should go. Don't force him because it will have the opposite effect. And then the rabbi's wife, when you move, like you've had a couple, good story, right? You've got a couple. You've had a couple of good allies on your little journey who have made it possible for you to.
Relatively speaking, I've been in certain ways very, very, very lucky. Very, very, very lucky.
We should just give a small shout out to those people, and Michelle as well, if she's listening. Hi, Michelle. You've been a great friend, and we appreciate you. Absolutely. So, what has your life been like since? I mean, I suppose since the 5 years since you went no contact with your family.
Yeah. So, well, actually, I did remember what I was about to say a moment ago. That I'll just say that I believe in Japan, most people don't like literally believe in God. You know, there's still a lot of going to temples and doing certain like good luck traditions kind of stuff. But there's like a saying in Japan that you're born Shinto, you marry Christian, and you die Buddhist. And what that means is, you know, the sort of the, I don't know that it's literally national, but like kind of the Japanese people's religion is Shintoism. And then everybody likes a big white Western style wedding. So a lot of people will get married in the Western Christian tradition of like a white wedding dress. And like, there's obviously traditional Japanese weddings as well that involve kimono and all that, which are really amazing and wonderful. But yeah, these days people like to have a Western style wedding, a lot of people. But then once you get older, you're like, Buddhism's where it's at. Yeah,
I want to come back somehow again, you know, somewhere.
It's Buddhism. So anyway, it's this little phrase that they have over there. But yeah, that's what I want to say about that. Last few years. So I graduated college in 2006, and yes, December 2006 was the end of college for me. I moved to Japan in June of 2007. I moved back to New York in October of 2008. So I was there for about a year and a quarter. And I lived in New York for about 6 years. And then I moved to Seattle about 6 years ago. So I've been living with my partner for a number of years, about 5 or so. We've been together a little over 6 years. And my day job is a user experience designer. And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, which is most people, it's not programming or graphic design. It's essentially planning out where things will go and what the layouts of screens will be for websites or apps and what will happen if you click a button. So all that planning, that's my day job. I work 30 hours a week. I work part-time. It's considered part-time at my company. And I work on a Japanese digital manga website, digital manga store, actually. So that's fun. And I work on comics on the side as a sort of hobby / future dream. And I have a short 14-page comic in American Cult, edited and organized by Robin Chapman, about growing up Orthodox Jewish. Every story in that book is by a different cartoonist, and some of them are about personal experiences, and a lot of them are essays about just other cults that have existed in America. And so my comic is essentially a comic essay arguing for why I think that Orthodox Judaism fits the definitions of a cult. I think personally people get much too hung up on the checklists that various people have proposed of whether or not something's a cult. I kind of think every religion could be considered a cult. But people are like, well, if you're born into it, it can't technically be a cult. And I have no patience for that at all whatsoever. You can convert to Judaism if you want. It's difficult, but there's a path. But also, like, when you grow up in a system that is so insular and your entire safety net and all of your social connections and all of your business connections and all of your resources are tied up in that community, and you're pressured to get married really young, like at 20 or 21, and pressured to have a lot of kids. If you if you lose your faith even by your mid-20s and you have a spouse and 3 kids, and that if you stop being religious, you'll lose all of your relationships with your immediate family, with your married family, lose custody of your kids. You might be working at a company or with people who are in the community. You might lose your job and just be down to zero. That a lot of people just can't do that. They'll just keep up appearances until the day they die, because it's too big of a risk. You're going to tell me that can't qualify as a cult? I don't buy it. So anyway, so American Cult is a great anthology comic. I have a comic in there. If you would like to check out just my comic, which is called aptly Orthodox Judaism is a Cult, I do have that up on my Gumroad. If you just Google Orthodox Judaism is a Cult, I'm sure you'll find it very easily.
I'll put a link in the episode description as well to the website where you can find it. Yeah,
you can download it for free if you put in 0 for the price. You just have to, if you just click download or give it to me or whatever, it's not going to work. You have to actually enter 0. That's how Gumroad works.
It's really good though. It's really easy to navigate, and I read through the comic myself, and I do recommend everybody goes and has a read, especially because it is accessible for free if you can't financially contribute. But if you can, then you can decide on the sum that you do contribute to read the work, and it really is.
If you want to kick me a few bucks or a few pounds or a few wherever you live currencies, that would be great. But I also very, very, very strongly encourage everyone to try and go find the book, the anthology comic itself, American Cult. It's sold in bookstores, and you can get it on Amazon, and you might be able to find it at your local library and so on. So definitely check it out, because it's full of other stories as well that you'll probably, if you're listening to this podcast, you'll probably enjoy.
Yes. So I will put links to the anthology and also to your specific short comic that was featured in that anthology. And what I really liked about the comic, the artwork's incredible, but I also really liked how you broke everything down. So for me, who's not familiar with Judaism, it was really it was really easy for me to go and read it, to understand it, and then to get the kind of cultic elements that you were trying to get across. But at the start, the little disclaimer that says, like, I'm not saying that the whole of Judaism is a cult. This is just my personal experience and the reason why I'm going to apply that word to the group that I was a part of, which I really appreciated reading that at the start. So it's definitely worth going to check that out. I would highly recommend it to people, especially if they're not too familiar with Judaism. I know that I'm not. If I see somebody
Most
over
people
here,
aren't.
Yeah, if I see somebody over here that's wearing anything that might resemble them being Jewish, I'm like, oh my goodness. That's that it's kind of like, seeing.
That's what it's like being a white person in Japan when I was living there.
Yeah, so your love for like manga and anime and comics, and was that before or after your visit to Japan?
Well, actually, I had read very little manga and watched very little anime before I moved to Japan. My interest in it actually was so I one of my big outlets sort of and connections to the outside world growing up was playing video games, which is something that we had. We had video games, we had cable TV, we would go out to see movies, maybe a couple times a year we would go into Manhattan and see a musical. So I played a lot of video games, and a lot of video games at the time, at least, were specifically created in Japan. These days, of course, there are video games created in studios all over the world, and it's not primarily like only a Japanese type of product.
But the consoles as well, I suppose, from your childhood were primarily coming from,
Right, exactly. So, I was very into things like Final Fantasy, which is, a Japanese RPG role-playing game series. So, the idea of maybe getting to work on video games, actually, that's what I went to college to major in originally was video game design. And I eventually got scared off from that by a bunch of horror stories about how little it pays and how long the hours are and how difficult it is, which not much has changed over the last 15 years. But I ended up actually like pivoting over to graphic design, which is what led to web design, which is what led to UX design. But originally I wanted to major in video game design and maybe one day work in Japan. And when I got to college, it was the first time this very small tech school I went to was offering a Japanese language class. And I was forced to take Hebrew as a language in 9th grade. Everyone was in my school. And I was just absolutely terrible at it. Just so bad. There was a joke that nobody would ever get lower than a 90 on the Hebrew regents. The regents, again, were the New York State tests you'd have to take at the end of the year to get class credit for it. So there were math regents and so on. And they were like, oh, the Hebrew regents are so easy. Nobody gets less than a 90. I got a 75.
Ooh.
So I passed, but barely. I was terrible at Hebrew. And part of it is that it's gendered, like a lot of Romance languages. But of course, English is not largely. So I didn't know whether I was just bad at learning languages or whether I was bad at learning Hebrew. So I was very, very curious about Japanese because I knew literally nothing about it at all linguistically. And so I audited a Japanese class my freshman semester. And I loved it. I had a lot of fun. I thought it was very interesting. It did not pose any serious challenges for me. The thing about Japanese is that when you're learning the very simple stuff at the beginning, it's really easy to learn completely natural phrases, like short phrases, words and things. You can just say them and you sound like a normal person. With English, there's so many little details, like a versus an, the, definite articles, pluralization. It can be really difficult to sound natural, even saying a very simple sentence. On the other hand, with Japanese, once you get into intermediate and advanced topics, the difficulty spikes and it becomes way, 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 way more difficult to actually be able to understand and speak naturally the more you learn. So at the beginning, it was actually really like simple and fun for me. And,
you're like, oh, I could do this. I could get the 80.
Exactly. So my next fall semester, they had hired additional teachers. And so although I had just audited the class my first semester, then the next fall I took Japanese 101 and I enjoyed it again. I took Japanese 2, then I took Japanese 1. Then I took Japanese 2 the semester after that. And then I took Japanese 3 the semester after that. And so in total, I took 3 semesters in a row, besides the one I audited, of Japanese. And about a year later, I moved there. So I brought my textbook with me to refresh myself. But I was still pretty much at a very elementary level. But, I could I could read a little bit.
Feeling good about it. Yeah.
I could say I could talk a little bit, if I was at the convenience store, I could say, oh, I don't need a bag, I could find the soy milk versus the
that's
dairy milk,
pretty good. I know like baka.
Well, that's one word. Actually, there are a lot of words you probably know that you don't realize you know. Like
I
tsunami.
I do watch anime quite a lot with the and I would never watch it dubbed. So I kind of pick up little phrases here and there, but no, I wouldn't be able to. That's good though.
There are a lot of loan words in English people don't realize are Japanese. When I was little, I thought sayonara, which is how the Americans people I grew up with pronounced it. I thought that was Italian because it sounded so much like marinara to me. But I did not realize it was sayonara, which is goodbye in Japanese. But yeah, so anyway, I got into it through video games, and then when I was taking Japanese, maybe my second or third semester of Japanese class, my teacher told us all about the JET program, which is this government program where you can work as an English language teaching assistant in Japan, and they're pretty cushy jobs usually, and they're usually in more rural areas is the thing, so they're further away from cities, which is not. I was looking to be closer to like a place like Tokyo. But yeah, I found out about that and I applied for that. And the thing is that program is so popular that about half of from what I hear, about half the applications are just thrown out because they don't have the people to look at them. And then, it's very difficult to get picked because of how popular it is. So I did not get into the JET program, but then I was told by a classmate about all these private companies called Eikaiwa, which means English conversation, which are sort of similar jobs that you can get if you just have a bachelor's degree, just a 4 years degree in anything. And you can teach English there that way, get a 1 year contract and go over to Japan. And so I started applying to and interviewing with various Eikaiwa companies and got a job offer from one of them. And yeah, ended up going and doing that. Yeah, I mean, and I never had a proper English grammar class growing up. Like we had English as a class, like where you read books and read The Great Gatsby and write essays and whatever, but I never had a proper grammar class. And so a lot of these applications, or not applications, but the interview processes for these English teaching jobs include a English grammar test of some length. Some of them are really long, like literally 100 questions, one of them. And it's like, do you know what a preposition is? And do you know what the past perfect tense is? And the present perfect and so on. And
sounds intimidating even to me. Like,
yeah, well, so I bombed a couple of them. And actually my friend Michelle that I mentioned, she is very, very into linguistics. She is the type of person who took Latin in high school, and so I was like, what book do I read to learn how English grammar works? And she's like, okay, here's the book, read this chapter, you're good. And I did that, and it had everything in it. And then the next interview I went to, I totally aced the grammar test and everything else was smooth sailing. And so that worked out great. But something I was going to touch upon much, much, much earlier, side note, you might want to actually take this and like insert it earlier when we were talking about yeshiva, because it slipped my mind. I was going to bring it up. Is I think it was when we were talking about, how much power should like the state have over someone's culture, right? There are communities in New York, for example, in Brooklyn, in other towns outside of New York City, where it's an ultra-Orthodox community will have a yeshiva school system that is way, way, way stricter than mine in that it literally does not meet the state legal requirements for what is taught in schools. So
wow.
in America, or at least I don't know about, exactly if it varies state to state, but in New York State, there are laws about if you have a private school, whether it's religious or otherwise, you need to have a certain amount of study time or classes for science, for math, and so on. And they just don't. And in these communities, the mother tongue is Yiddish. They grow up speaking Yiddish. They don't really use English. They don't really learn much English. By the time they're adults, they can speak, read, and write relatively little English. And a lot of folks here in these communities, they don't know much about how you would go about opening a bank account or applying for student
Right,
loans
yeah.
or all these various things that you would
Mhm.
need to be able to do if you ever wanted to
Wanted
get
to
out
be
in the first
independent,
place.
absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so first of all, a lot of these schools, they'll maybe have like 1 hour of secular classes a week or every couple of days. I don't know the details because I didn't go to one of them, but I've read news articles over the last several years about them. And the thing is, there are a lot of Orthodox Jews in these areas, and even when an American Democrat gets elected, they do not do anything to try and enforce these things because they don't want to lose the Orthodox Jewish vote. And so you have all these schools that are literally breaking the law, and I do not support that. I mean, if I were a kid in that environment, I would. I mean, I was a kid in a much less terrible environment than that, and I absolutely felt like I was getting the raw deal there, the short end of the stick.
And I suppose that there are communities that are formed. So people, the argument might be, well, why would you need to know any of those things? Because you don't need to go outside of the community. Everybody in your community speaks Yiddish. Everybody in your community.
In the community. Yeah.
Absolutely. But then what about seeing the world? What about exploring?
100%. To this day. So because of all the kosher laws, there were so many foods that I never got a chance to try until I was in college. Literally the first time I ever had shrimp or bacon, for example, was when I was in college. Most people, I would say, can't remember the first time they had most foods, but like shrimp specifically, I had grown up watching commercials for a chain we have, at least in the US, called Red Lobster, where they would have like buckets of shrimp flying through the air.
Their little aprons on and
and it just looked majestic to me. I was like, oh, these look so mouth-wateringly good. I can't even imagine what it's like. But the flavor and the texture of shrimp when I first had it was so unlike literally anything I'd ever had before. It's like if you had fish and you try a non-kosher fish, you're like, oh, this is unique, but it still tastes like fish. If you have pork, but you've never had pork, you're like, oh, this is maybe somewhat unique, but it still tastes like meat. It's not that different from beef. It's a little different, but you get the same general idea between like a pork chop and a steak. But shrimp blew my mind. I didn't even know how I felt about it at first. I was like, do I like this? Do I not like this? I don't know. It's so the flavors and textures are so new. I need to spend some time with this and really consider it. So I came back to it, multiple times, and I love shrimp today. And I got used to it, and I was able to really appreciate it. And again, I didn't dislike it, but it was just I could hardly even comprehend it at first. It was so new to me, and so I had so many of those experiences. The first time I went to a McDonald's to get a Big Mac, I'm like, look, this is gross, but I've been coveting this since I was a little kid.
I'm gonna have my beef. I'm gonna have my cheese. Like. I'm gonna have them together.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, literally the first time I ever had cheese on a burger. Like, so there was all that stuff. And to this day, to get back to your point from a minute ago, it is relatively often that I will be eating something delicious that is either just plain, it might not be inherently non-kosher, but it might be from a non-kosher restaurant, or maybe it's something non-kosher in and of itself. And I will think to myself, there are so many people that I grew up with who will literally never have the opportunity to enjoy this just really wonderful human experience of knowing what it tastes like to cook meat in butter.
There's loads of things you've said though that I've thought that to myself as you've gone through. On Friday nights, my mum and dad would get us. We used to get these little boxes from the local takeaway where they'd put like a big piece of chicken on one side. And I remember the skin of the chicken was so tasty because they used to put like this really nice spices on the chicken skin that they'd cook it in. And then on the other side of the box there were these fries, and then me and my brother would put ketchup and mayonnaise and mix it together, and then we'd sit down and we'd watch this. I can't remember I was trying to think of the name of it the other day. This program would be on the telly on Friday nights, and it was like it was a little bit like Battlestar Galactica, but it wasn't that. It was a
Doctor
program
Who.
set in space, not Doctor Who. No, it was a
I'm
program
joking.
set in space, and it had a male protagonist. I'm sure if I googled it, I could find out the name. But then on Saturday mornings, me and my dad would get up in the mornings, and we'd watch WWE wrestling, which was WWF back in the day.
Oh yeah, when I was a little kid, I was all about WWF. I was all about
WWF,
Ultimate Warrior.
yeah. And the
most
Undertaker was
fabulous
my
one.
favorite, and then he left, and then he came back.
Did you say the Undertaker?
Yeah,
He was my second favorite. I thought because I've got two parts to my personality: the neon green and pink Ultimate Warrior style, and then the totally gothed out Undertaker style. And I love them both. So I strongly relate. Yes.
So I liked Rey Mysterio as well, but he just came into it as I kind of was stopping to watch it. So and then I remember watching the episode where, because Kane was the Undertaker's brother, and they did this big episode where the Undertaker was going to fight his brother, and then Kane takes his mask off for the first time, and he's supposed to have this like horrifically mold and burnt face, and he took his mask off, and it was just normal skin, and I was like, oh, that was really underwhelming. But we'd get up in the mornings and we'd watch WWF, and then there was this show called, I'm sure you have it over there, American version of Robot Wars.
Yeah, where
people make their robots, and I mean, I'm saying this to you like, you might not have heard of these programs for just.
No, I don't know that I've ever actually watched it, but I remember that I think it was on the Sci-Fi Channel when I was in college. I definitely saw commercials for it.
So there was WWF Robot Wars, and then there was this program called this show called SMTV, which was Saturday morning television, and there were three hosts, Ant Deck and Kat Deely, and they would just do silly things like dunk each other in gunk if they got questions wrong. And
kind of sounds like Double Dare on Nickelodeon.
Yeah, like a big funhouse type thing where they would So that was my Saturday morning, and even then, when you were saying, that there are people that you grew up with that will never get to have these experiences that you're having, just with being able to be in a relationship with who you want to be with no pressure on the religious affiliation they have or the gender that they are, down to all the things that you eat. And if you want to do some of your work on a Friday night on your computer, if you're working from home and you're like, do you know what, I'm not going to do any work Friday morning, I'm just going to chill Friday morning and I'll do some of it at home on Friday night. You have the option to do that now. So I was kind of just thinking about a few of the things that I'd done when I was younger that I'd taken for granted that you hadn't experienced, and I suppose now you'll have those thoughts and feelings about. Do you find yourself doing that a lot as well, thinking when you're about to do something, oh, this is something that I wouldn't have been able to do, but I now have the opportunity to do it?
Yeah, I savor it 100%. I mentioned how on Passover you can't have anything with any sort of grains in it except for matzah, right? So it really limits what you can eat. You might not realize it, but there's just so many things that you have every day that have grains in it, and you can't eat it for 8 days. And it's really a form of torture. Like it was like ask anyone. Like by the end of the 8 days, they are salivating just at the idea of some pasta or pizza or bread or whatever. Anyway, when it is Passover and I get to have a sandwich, it's amazing. It's incredible. Like to paraphrase, I think it's a book by John Green. The line is something like the taste of broccoli does not in any way affect the taste of chocolate. In other words, you do not need to suffer anything negative in order to be able to actually appreciate and enjoy anything positive. So this idea of it's good that you suffer because then you get to really enjoy it when something's nice, I don't buy into that personally. I think ideally, if God existed and had infinite power, etc., everyone would be in constant euphoria constantly.
Yeah,
and
and
that would be
broccoli would
possible.
taste like chocolate.
Right.
Everything would taste like
Yeah,
chocolate.
sure. And what have you, right? Because, you know, all omniscient, omnipotent, all powers, like,
Yeah.
if anything can be made possible, then anything can be made possible, right? So, and that's kind of the Jewish idea of what heaven is. It's just like, we can't even comprehend it, but basically it'll just be so euphoric, just constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And the better you were in life, the more euphoric it'll be when you're dead. So you have to be as good as you can and get all the mitzvah points so that it's going to be as good as it can be once you're dead. The other side of that coin is that Orthodox Jews believe that everyone goes to hell. Now, hell in Judaism is not hell in Christianity. And so more accurately, I guess I would use the word, more accurately, I would say the Jewish conception of hell is more like purgatory, but we never said purgatory because there's no distinction really for Jews. We would refer to it as Gehenna, which is a Hebrew word, but essentially, it's hell. And what I was taught is that unless you were like the worst of the worst, like there's like one particular biblical character who is said to be in hell forever. And, growing up, people would say like, oh, Hitler's definitely in hell forever. But basically, besides, really, you could count on one hand. The longest time you could be in hell would be for 1 year, 12 months. And during that time, during the 12 months that after somebody passes away, their immediate family members, so parents, children, and siblings, say a special prayer for them every day after group prayer, at the synagogue or wherever, called Kaddish. And that is to help ease the pain of whatever they might be experiencing in hell while they are potentially there. And you actually only say Kaddish for 11 months of the year of mourning because it's part of this, like, don't play with your crutches, your brother's crutches, you might break your leg.
Right, yeah.
You don't want the outward appearance to be, I'm saying, I think my family member, my relative, was so bad that they could potentially be there for the full 12 months that I'm only going to stop saying it after 11 months because I don't want anyone to even suspect something so bad about them. Because your time there could be shorter the better you are. And there's a little parable or anecdote or whatever in the Bible about how even Moses, who never did any sins until he was supposed to ask this rock for some water, and for whatever reason he decided to hit it with his stick instead of asking it, and it split open and it gave water to the Jews in the desert. God was like, hey, I told you to talk to the rock, not to hit it, so now you're not allowed to enter Israel. And that's why Moses died before they got to Israel, and he never got to actually see the promised land. So this is like a story there to say, like, even Moses went to hell for a hot minute. No pun intended. Maybe intended. So that's the other side of the coin, is that everybody goes for some point. And that was part of my calculation kind of when growing up. I was like, look, a lifetime of loneliness in exchange for a maximum of 12 months of hell. That sounds like a no-brainer to me. Actually, I think I will make that exchange and try to be a good person. So,
and it seems like the decisions that you've made, I mean, it's a tragedy really that you've had to go no contact with your family because we only get, I know that we can adopt families and we can make our own families, but we get one family. And it's always heartbreaking when I listen to ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who are disfellowshipped, who are now shunned and don't have contact with their family and friends anymore. And it's almost like they've had to mourn losing an entire lifetime and a network of people that they love. So that there is that side of it. But for you personally, the fulfillment that you have now, you have a life partner. You get to eat and drink what you want and do what you want when you want, and it's just a great advert for anybody who could be in a similar situation that's thinking about taking a step away from their high demand religious group, which is absolutely what this sounds like. If I've ever heard of a high demand religious group, the one that you've described today fits that phrase like perfectly.
High demand religious group does sound like a particularly polite euphemism for it, but I think it is accurate. And anyone who's interested in hearing another perspective from folks who grew up Orthodox Jewish and got out. There are two really great memoirs I would recommend, and you can get audiobooks read by the authors if you're interested. One is called All Who Go Do Not Return by Shalom Dean. Really, really good stuff. And he's basically like a poster child for the type of person who got pressured into getting married really, really young, had several kids. I forget how many he has, maybe 5 or 6, I don't know. And, lost his faith, and over a period of time, came clean with his wife, and they were still together for a while, but eventually they got divorced, and he essentially lost the ability to have his kids custody. He lost custody of his kids and so on. Just a really terrible story. But I mean, silver lining, he got out. But anyway, that's a great memoir. And then also Foreskin's Lament.
Foreskin's Lament. Oh my goodness. By
Shalom Auslander, who has been on the podcast This American Life a number of times, reading short essays, some of which are from the book. He's very funny, and a lot of the book is written with a lot of wit, but it also it definitely contains some pretty dark parts. So just be aware that it's not a comedy through and through. Like there's some pretty heavy and serious stuff.
A lot of the time in that type of writing, though, the comedy element makes the darker stuff hit even harder.
yeah, definitely. So those two memoirs are really good. I definitely recommend them. Another couple of things, actually, I'd like to just mention is there's an organization in New York called Footsteps, and they specifically help people who are raised ultra-Orthodox connect with resources that will help them get
that's
out
fantastic.
If they want to. And so, they don't proselytize, but they can help you learn how to apply for student loans.
I'm sure they have a website as well.
Yeah.
So I'll put that in the episode description along with the comic links as well.
Yeah. So they're great. There are some there are some documentaries on like Netflix about folks in Orthodox Judaism. There's also Unorthodox, which is based on a memoir by a woman who escaped ultra-Orthodox Judaism. I would say about the first half of it is essentially true to life, true to her experiences, and then the second half is much more dramatized for TV, for Netflix. But I quite enjoyed it. It's called Unorthodox. Not to be confused with My Unorthodox Life, which is a really trashy reality TV show on Netflix, which is about a woman who left Orthodox Judaism, but is just like, I don't mean this in a negative way, but like it is trashy reality TV. So if you're into trashy reality TV, no judgment. This is that. But it is not unorthodox. Just to draw a distinction between the two. Yeah, Unorthodox is a dramatization of a memoir, and it is much more serious and interesting, and I quite liked it. In addition to that, there are episodes of the podcast This American Life that touch on some of the topics that I've mentioned as well. I bet if you Google This American Life, Orthodox Jewish or Orthodox Judaism, you can probably find a couple about, for example, there's a town in New York State where essentially Orthodox Jewish folks essentially got control of the school board and continued to lower funding for the public schools and lower taxes, for themselves. And basically the public schools became incredibly low quality because of it. So there's stuff like that you can.
That's so sad. That.
Yeah. As for me, so besides the comic that I have in the American Cult Anthology, a few years ago, in about 2015 or so, I ran a Kickstarter to print a travelogue comic called Thoughts from Iceland, which is about a couple trips I took to Iceland. And it's essentially a diary comic, travelogue, autobio kind of thing about where I went and what I ate. And
wow, that sounds incredible.
So that's fun. And I printed it, and it's available digitally on Kindle, Comixology. But I have lately been converting it into sort of a vertical scroll webcomic, webtoons, tapas kind of format, and been posting that 3 days a week, Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. So you can always go and buy the book digitally or physically online if you want. Or if you want to read along with my converting it to a vertical format, it is on Webtoons.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
Feel free to follow along there. And then the big project I'm working on currently is a full-length autobiographic novel, graphic memoir about growing up gay and Orthodox Jewish. And the script is currently about 350-ish pages long. So it's like a real proper
amazing
graphic novel length book. Thoughts from My Son is a lot smaller. It's like maybe 114 pages or so. So this is a proper big boy book. And I am currently working on it with my partner, actually. So I wrote the script and I had an agent, and we pitched it to a number of publishers in 2018, and I got all passes. So everyone passed, and I spent about 3 years very, very heavily revising it, the script, and developing a very different art style for it. And so this year in 2021, I went back to my agent and said, okay, I'm ready to go again. And she is like, well, I don't actually have the bandwidth for this anymore, unfortunately. And I've been sort of focused on younger graphic novels now. So we parted ways amicably, and I no longer have an agent. So I'm shopping it around to agents and publishers. But so I'm working, so I did the script, and then I do the page layouts, and then like the panel layouts and stuff. And then my partner draws basically like a really tied down sketch, because they're a really good draftsperson. They're very good at like perspective and proportion and things like that. And so they'll do like a really good sketch, and then I'll ink over that. And usually I'll do the actual faces and stuff to like make sure individual characters look like that character is supposed to look like. And then I'll do the colors as well. So it's a sort of a pastel-y feeling digital watercolor style that I'm working in.
Oh, lovely.
So yeah, this collaboration with my partner, I think is going really great and looking really good. So we're working on that, and I am working on trying to get someone to want to publish it.
I think it will happen. Your story is so fascinating, and I feel like there's a real want and need for that at the moment, if you find the right consumer. I mean, there must be one, because people keep coming back to listen to this podcast each week. So there has to be some people somewhere. Yeah, like autobio comics, graphic memoirs are essentially my favorite genre. Things like Fun Home or Spinning, or I mean, there's so many. Stitches by David Small is, I think, has a very similar vibe to what I'm going for. But yeah, where it feels somewhere between an essay and like a letter from a friend. That's what I really most enjoy. That personable story. Yeah, I like that too. Yeah.
So that's what I'm going for. And there's definitely a market for it, but it's comics have been growing year over year, but it's at least in the US, it's a much smaller proportion of book sales overall. And then when you look at comics, the proportion of comics that are autobio or graphic novels, and not superheroes or like kids comics, things like that, is also much smaller. So it's a slice of a slice, kind of like Orthodox Jews within Judaism, within the overall like world population. It's kind of a percentage.
Parallels, lots of parallels.
Lots of parallels. But yes, that's what I'm working on. And if anyone is interested, I post little panels, little preview bits online at my Twitter and my Instagram, both of which are Lonnie Comics, LONNIECOMICS.
All of this stuff.
So at Lonnie Comics. If you just want the art, go to Instagram, because I retweet a lot of political stuff on Twitter. So just FYI on that. And certainly, if anyone is interested in potentially reading the manuscript for representation or publishing, please let me know. You can email me at Lonnie, that's LONNIE, at Lonnie Mann, my full name, LONNIEMANN, like the gender plus an extra N at the end, .com, Lonnie at LonnieMann.com. Feel free to let me know if you want to chat.
I'm sure that people, if they would like to get in touch with you, can also email myself or get in touch with myself at social media, and we can connect you two together. The Shulem Dean memoir that you mentioned earlier was one of the last points on my extensive list of things to talk about that I've been scribbling.
Did we cover everything else?
We did. So this is the other page. So I've been scribbling things out as we've been going. And one of the only things that I wanted to mention before I ask you if there's anything you think we've missed is to let people know that there is an ex-Jew subreddit that I have been posting in to find yourself and a few other people to interview. So if anybody is looking for a support forum or to read other people's experiences of being in a certain sect of Judaism or leaving a certain sect of Judaism, or people who are thinking about leaving, people from all different walks of life within the Jewish community, you can find them within this particular subreddit. So that is there for anybody who would be interested in going to have a look.
So FYI on that, it's EXJEW, ex-Jew. Make sure you have the second E, or you'll wind up at XJW, which is for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. And we somewhat often get mistaken posts that were meant for ex-Jehovah's Witnesses subreddit on our ex-Jews subreddit, and there is a tag for it. And so it's like,
tagged. That's so funny.
We support you, but this is not where you meant to be. Actually,
I wonder if because there's like some similarities between the two. I wonder if anybody's ever posted and been in the wrong place and nobody's ever realized, and you've still offered that person support.
I think the religions themselves are so unique that it would be impossible to confuse them. But there are plenty of people who are like ex-Christian, ex-Muslim, who come to the ex-Jews subreddit just to be like, hey, I am not Jewish, but I am this, that, or the other, and I feel this way and that way. How do you feel about this? And did you experience this kind of stuff? Because I did. So those kind of discussions do occur.
That sounds like a great discussion to have as well.
Most of the posts on the ex-Jew subreddit are just like bitching and moaning about stuff. Some proportion of the people who are on the subreddit live in Israel. They're Israeli citizens and are just like complaining about particular groups of religious Jews in Israel specifically that I have no familiarity with. And so I'm like, okay, I have nothing to contribute, and I don't even understand what you're referencing at this point because I grew up in New York. So, and so there's that as well. There's a lot of people who are either too young to leave, or they're stuck for whatever reason, or they haven't quite built up the courage, or there are also people who are very seriously considering converting to Judaism and kind of want one last potential being talked out of it. Who post. So there are a lot of different kinds of posts there, but mostly it's like, hey, you all remember dealing with this? Yeah, that was terrible. Yeah. So, that's a lot of it. One thing I also wanted to mention is that there was a documentary that came out, I think when I was in high school, but I didn't end up finding a copy and watching it till I was in college, which was about gay Jews of various levels of observance of Judaism, and trying to have same-sex relationships while still practicing religious Judaism to some degree or another. And I would say it's bittersweet, but it's more bitter than sweet. Like there's one particular couple, which are these two ultra-Orthodox lesbians who, they make Shabbos together every week and they live together, and it's like very sweet, and neither of their faces are on camera for anonymity. But apparently after that documentary came out, at some point they split up. So it's like, that was like the main like note of potential hope. And then it's when you learn that, it's like, oh, wow, okay, that's too bad.
Yeah.
So, but that was, it's called Trembling Before God.
Trembling Before God. Okay. So that's another documentary. So there's plenty of resources that we can list in the episode description. You've given people lots to go and look at if they find themselves in a situation similar to the one that you've been in.
To give one piece of advice to someone who's currently stuck in the community and wants to get out, I would say the first thing you need to achieve is financial independence. Because if you have a place to stay and you're making enough money that you can pay for your basic cost of living, get that set up first. And then you can tell anyone in your life you need to tell, hey, I don't believe in this anymore. I do not, I'm not living this lifestyle anymore. And if you are interested in having relationships with these people, tell them, look, I still care about you. I would like to continue having a relationship with you, but I am not doing XYZ anymore. And like, you need to meet me where I am, kind of thing. And like, if you don't treat me with respect, I'm just going to not respond to you. Right. But you need to have that security first, that financial independence. So if you're still in high school, if you're in college, or if you're currently in a marriage, if you're stuck somewhere like that, you need to be able to secure a place you can stay, a way you can pay for things. And then once you're safe and supported, you can go and tell people. And however much support and relationship is remains for you is great. But I would say just don't do anything too hastily. It's definitely bit me in the behind when I've come out too early or things like that.
That always reminds me of something. I spoke to an ex-Jehovah's Witness, and she said to me, my one piece of advice would be, before you leave, get your ducks in a row. And that expression always like stuck in the back of my mind. So whenever people kind of mention what you've just mentioned, about kind of trying to have something financial or a place to stay, things to fall back on, just try and get your ducks in a row.
Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic. Absolutely. So thank you so much for coming and joining me today. We've spoken for over 3 hours, and we probably could talk for at least another 3 more.
I'm sure there's stuff I forgot to mention, but
I imagine there's so much of it, and I always feel like I need to do like 10 follow-up episodes with everybody I speak to because we never have enough time. But I really appreciate you coming and sharing your story today and educating me on so many things that I didn't know about. And,
of course, it's a rabbit hole.
It definitely it's a subject that I know eventually I'm going to have to dive deeper into so that I can understand more people's experiences and stories when they come forward to speak about what they've been through, which is exciting and daunting at the same time from what you've told me about your experience. But I really do look forward to it, and I hope that the listeners really enjoy, and I know they will as well, hearing all about your experiences and your story, and just how overwhelming all of these rules and everything is, and I just really appreciate your time, Lonnie. So thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. I look forward to hearing what this sounds like when it comes out and sending it to everyone.
Absolutely, it's going to be fantastic. Thanks, Lonnie. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
That is the end of this week's episode. To get in touch, please follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod, or email me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com. I'm your speaker, Casey, and this has been The Cult Vault.